Hey there. If you're watching this live, then you're what I like to call fashionably early, or more like fashionably on time, so thank you for being here. If you're not watching this live, feel free to skip a minute or so ahead. But if you're here, take this opportunity to slow down, maybe go brush your teeth, get a glass of water, say hi to everyone in the comments, or I could stop talking and let you enjoy some jazz. You still here? Good. I'm just checking. Before we begin, remember to keep it civil in the comments. Don't say anything you wouldn't want said to you. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the stream. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Apostate Aladdin or Apostate Aladdin. Today I want to be talking about Shabir Ally's lectures on women and matters that concern women. So if you're not familiar with this live stream format, it's called Dissecting Apologetics. And the purpose of that is to take apart the words of da'wah men and apologists and try to understand what they mean. It's not to try to trip them on anything. It's to see if their words follow. Because more often than not, they're just switching topics between one thing and another, and they don't always seem to answer the question or at least address the matter head on. Shabir Ally, however, he seems a lot more direct when it comes to owning up to what he refers to as the classical interpretations of Islam. And he doesn't do a great job of explaining what that means. I mean, in terms of what is the contemporary or the modern interpretation, how is it standardized compared to the classic interpretation? He doesn't talk too much about that. But nonetheless, I'll give him credit for being direct. Does that mean that I like Shabir Ally? Well, I guess as much as I can like an apologist or a dawah person, he's one of the more tolerable ones out there. But it doesn't mean that he gets a pass on what he says, or that just because he's direct about some things that he's not indirect about other things. So I'm going to let the man speak and let the Quran speak, as he likes to put it. And one of the motivations one of the reasons why I'm talking about Shabir again today is, aside from the fact that he is palpable, which makes it more important in a sense to listen to what he's saying and take it apart, compared to, for example, someone like Daniel Haqiqatu. I'm always told to comment on what he says, and I feel like that's very redundant because he's very obviously hateful and very obviously by the book, so I don't know if there's much that needs to be, exposed there. But when it comes to people who are somewhere in between, it's good to clarify what they mean and what that entails in terms of long-term effects and how that actually affects Muslims in real life. Are they just putting on PR for Islam, or are they actually addressing the issues? So you probably think that I'm biased. You probably think that I want them to make mistakes, but I truly watch this now as if I'm watching it back when I was a Muslim who had the same questions. So that's the lens that I am viewing this from. And the reason why I'm talking about him, aside from that, is because in my last stream featuring Shabir Ally, I did quote a 1-minute segment of an interview of his that someone had linked to me in the comments. And I don't want to be doing that going forward because I want to vet the source first. I want to make sure that I'm not taking anything out of context. And that was we'll see if that was a mistake in that case, but either way, I don't want to be doing that going forward. So I will be starting with that clip, that 1-minute clip. it's not a great topic, but then again, none of these topics are particularly happy topics, but they need to be spoken about anyway. And then I'll play the actual full clip, his full interview, and we'll see what the difference is. And we'll see if I misquoted him in a sense. So, one thing I want you to do today, if you feel like being more proactive, bring a pen and paper, or pencil and paper, and just every time he's asked a question, feel free to write it down and focus on what he's saying. And at some point, we'll pause or remind me to pause and assess whether he did answer the question or not. Because sometimes I have thoughts when I'm watching the stream back to add timestamps later on. I realize I should have commented on that, or he didn't even comment on this question or that question. He didn't answer it. So please help me out by pointing out when he hasn't answered the question. And feel free to count how many times that happens, and also how many times he falls back on talking points like everyone used to do this back then and historical context without explaining how that has changed or why that has changed and so on. So we'll keep a running count of both of those. And I wish I could show you, but my cat is here. He knows when I'm streaming. He can smell it and he wants to distract me. That's what I'm doing with my hands right now. So say hi to everybody before I ignore you. Hey, that's a poo. Okay. Now, let's get to it. We'll start with the video titled. So this video is posted by Ex-Muslims of Norway, a YouTube channel, and it's a 1-minute segment. I'll start by playing it, and then I'll just jump to the actual full interview. So let me put that on screen. Let me know if the audio is good. So the title of this video is Shabir Ally explains how sex slavery and rape are part of Islamic culture. Obviously the title is not how Shabir would have put it, but this is how the channel Ex-Muslims of Norway has put it.
View on concubines.
A Muslim man.
Can you
So
hear it
what
okay?
is Islam's view on concubines?
A Muslim man can have up to 4 wives at once. In addition to the 4 wives, he can have an unlimited number of concubines, which refer to women who are basically have slave status. When they are owned by her master, a woman owned by her master has to freely give herself to the master. The master has the right to have sexual relations with her as though she were one of his wives.
And how does consent play into this at all, or?
Unfortunately, I cannot raise the volume of this particular video, but in the next ones I will.
Can we?
The understanding is that by virtue of the fact that she's owned, she does not have the right to consent. Or to withhold herself from her master. The master has the full right over her, and her consent does not play anything in this relationship.
Okay, so you've heard it here. I will comment on the specifics of the words that he has chosen, but I'll just do that in the full video, in the context of the full video. Let's see if this, no, that's not it. Let's see if this sounds any better. Should be a little louder.
Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. We have received many questions from you, our viewers, on the topic of female slavery. Of particular concern has been Daesh's use of sex slaves. The group claims that this is in line with Islam. Let's go back to the Quranic text and sit down with Dr. Shabir Ally to analyze and make sense of Islam's perspective on female slavery. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So what is Islam's view on concubines?
Well, rather than say Islam's view, I'd have to dissect this now and say, okay, what does the Quran say? Because they could.
Well, one thing I noticed right away is the question, as soon as she asked it, the way that he answered it in that segment, they cut out this part where he says, what does that mean? And then he talks a little bit more detail. So I would have liked it if they had left that part in. However, I don't know if it changes the meaning that much. We'll have to listen and see.
Sure.
Pleasure to be on.
So what is Islam's view on concubines?
Well, rather than say Islam's view, I'd have to dissect this now and say, okay, what does the Quran say?
It's funny that he uses the word dissect. And he says, rather than Islam, I'll talk about the Quran. And
because there could be Quran statements, there could be
Yes.
Hadith statements, there could be like scholars' statements, and Islam often is thought to be like an amalgamation of all of these, and it gets confusing sometimes. So, in essence, generally in classical Islamic thought, it is taken for granted that a Muslim man can have up to four wives at once.
I don't, the way that he's wording it, generally in classic Islamic thought, it is taken for granted that a Muslim man just get to the point. So he uses a lot of these filler words to separate himself as much as possible, or the answer from the actual answer. So why is he qualifying it with? I mean, it's good to qualify it with classical tafsirs or so on, but to say eh, like these filler words,
It is
generally in classical Islamic thought,
taken for granted
it
that
is taken for granted.
a Muslim man can have up to four wives at once. In addition to the four wives, he can have an unlimited number of concubines,
So you heard it.
which refer to women who are basically have they have slave status.
They have slave status. Look at how that is worded. Okay, so this is, I complimented the man for being the most direct, and this is the best that you get when it comes to apologetics. So they have slave status. They are slave. They are owned. Just put it that way.
When they are owned by her master, a woman owned by her master um, has to freely give her herself to the master. The master has the right to have sexual relations with her as though she were one of his wives.
Is there something
Notice how he said as though she was, he has the right to have sexual relations with her as though she was one of his wives. We're going to get to the specifics of that at some point in this stream, but basically the wives, and he says it in one of the videos, I don't know if we're going to get to it today. He says that the wife and the slave, according to classical thought or whatever, are very close in terms of rights and status and so on. Obviously, the wife is higher, but as he said, the husband has the right to have sex with her just as he would one of his wives. So the right is over the wife as well.
is there a verse in the Quran that specifically states what you had said? that you mentioned?
Often, verses of the Quran are called into play in this in discussion of this topic, but the verses are not so clear as one might expect.
That's funny that he said that. The title of this series or this channel, I think, is Let the Quran Speak. And he says, the verses are not so clear as one might expect there. Yes, it's almost as if he understands our point. Allah said the Quran is supposed to be clear, or at least one would expect the perfect Quran that Allah had all the time in the world to write to be clear, but we're not even sure what he meant. Even Shabir is saying it.
There are two verses, for example, in which speak about what your right hands possess. Surah 23 at the beginning and Surah 80, which happens to be not a long surah, so it's easy to find the verse, which says that the believers are those who guard their private parts except from their wives and what their right hands possess. But curiously enough, while this is often interpreted to mean that a man could have sexual relations with his female slaves, it is never interpreted to mean that a woman could have sexual relations with her male slaves.
So you see that? He said it very clearly. It is never interpreted that women could have male slaves. And some of the reasoning for that, I don't think he gets into it, but some of the reasoning kind of makes sense, which is you don't want kids from slaves, I suppose. I mean, makes sense within the framework of this bizarre system. So yeah, let it be clear.
So obviously, in the classical interpretation, the broad statement of the Quran was already given some limitation, and we could ask why only that one limitation, or have they really captured the meaning of the verses? So we'll need to come back to that and look at some alternative.
So classically, have they captured the meaning of the verses? So over 1400 years or so, have they managed to understand the verse?
Possibilities when we deal with the Quranic text. Another interesting verse is in Surah 4, verse number 25, which tells Muslim men that if they cannot afford to marry free women, then they can marry a believing woman from among their right hand possessions.
What is a reference? What does right hand possession mean? Because I know you mentioned that earlier as well.
Well, this is taken to be a way of speaking about ownership,
Okay.
ownership of slaves. So your right hand possession, that's what you own.
Okay, let that be clear as well, because I've heard a lot of apologetics about what your right hand possesses does not mean slaves. It absolutely does.
So in this verse, Surah 4, verse number 25, the prescription is that men who cannot afford to marry free women can marry a believing woman from among their right hand possessions, meaning one of their female slaves. So some can argue that this verse, by enjoining on men that they marry the female slaves, and furthermore, it says that they're to have them as muhsanatin ghayr musafihat, as chaste women, not women who are promiscuous. So this should not be a promiscuous relationship.
He mentions details here and there that somehow are supposed to make things better, but they don't. For example, him saying this is supposed to be a marriage. There is an allowance for a man to marry a slave, and it's supposed to be not a promiscuous relationship, but a marriage. And what does that have to do with anything? He's trying to make it seem as if God is preserving morals or whatever, but if you don't marry her, I mean, you're only marrying her because you're too cheap or too poor to pay for a dowry to a free woman. So I don't understand here.
It should be one of decency, and a man then is going to have relations with his female slave, but not by virtue of the fact that she's a slave, but by virtue of the fact that he's married to her.
But what is the difference? I dare someone to tell me the difference. Because as we're going to see later, a woman doesn't really have the right to refuse her husband in bed unless she has a valid reason, like she's on her period, which she's not allowed to have intercourse on her period, or she's sick or something, but she has to have an excuse. If she's not feeling like it, that's not a reason. And some people might have leniency saying, well, it doesn't mean every time, but if she's doing it as a pattern to piss him off, you always hear that from Muslims when this topic comes up. They say if she's doing that, they're always painting the woman as this villain who's withholding sex from her husband. But if the woman enjoys intercourse with her husband, why would she withhold it? If they're painting this villainous caricature of a woman who isn't the typical case. The typical case is maybe she has issues with how they're having intercourse, or she's not feeling it, or if it's a systematic issue, maybe she has some other condition, or maybe he's not good at it. There's a lot of things that could be resolved in other ways than thinking that she's withholding it because she's an evil woman who's trying to piss him off. I mean, at the end of the day, if Islamically she's not allowed to, for example, masturbate, then she also needs that pleasure. So it doesn't make sense how they jump to this bizarre case.
And how does consent play into this at all, or can we understand anything about
This is the
consent, for
segment
example?
from earlier.
Female slave have to consent to that, or is it kind of like because she's owned and so therefore?
In the classical thought, the understanding is that by virtue of the fact that she's owned, she does not have the right to consent, or to withhold herself from her master. The master has a full right over her, and her
I'm going to
consent
speed this up.
does not play anything in this relationship. But by contrast, if you allow me for a moment, we should understand that in the ancient world, women did not have many rights.
All right, so keep this part in mind.
And even marriage was not as we might expect it today, like a relationship of equality between spouses. So in the Quran itself, a woman is her husband is referred to as her Baal, which literally means her Lord.
Okay, so he's talking about how in the times before Islam and around that time, marriage was not an equal 50-50 split. It was the man always had precedent. And he's saying in the Quran itself, he just said in the Quran itself, a woman is referred to, and we're going to talk about this verse later, a man is referred to as her Baal, and it means her Lord. It means her master. It means her husband. And you should look this up. You should look this up if you don't believe it. The Quran itself tells Muslim women, he has precedent over you in so many instances in the Quran. So I can never understand when apologists and Western feminists and so on say absurd things like the woman is owed an orgasm in Islam. What are you talking about when it's obvious the man has precedent in so many things?
And the idea that she would have consent in the marriage itself. This is stated in so many different ways in the Quran, but classical Muslim interpreters of the Quran, some of them
He says this is stated in many different ways in the Quran that she has some level of consent, but he doesn't say where. He talks a lot about the classical interpretations as he tries to separate himself from them, but he doesn't cite anything about where the woman has consent or how we can make a case. I mean, think about this from the point of view of a Muslim who wants to agree with Shabir Ali. Again, this is not meant to trip him up. I don't hate this guy, but I want him to be right. So I want to point at something so that I can point to so called extremists who aren't really extremists. They're just following Islam and tell them, no, the woman has the right to consent according to this and that. But he doesn't even bring up those verses. He just merely alludes to the possibility that there are other places where you could interpret that that is some form of necessity for consent.
said that the woman's main responsibility in a marriage is to fulfill the sexual needs of her husband, and for that reason, the husband has the right and the claim to this, and she cannot refuse.
You heard it here, said as clear as day.
So some of them even speak of the
Yeah, sorry, I can't seem to raise the volume on this video, so I'm just gonna talk a little bit further away. Hopefully that equalizes everything.
Possibility that the man could force himself onto his wife and she cannot refuse, because that is his right. Of course, this is not ideal, and none of them would say that this is an ideal situation.
He says, of course, this is not ideal, and none of them would say that this is an ideal situation of a man forcing himself on his wife. Thank you. What does that do for a woman? Oh, they say it's not ideal. Sorry, it's halal, but it's not ideal. It is what it is. God's words, not mine. So bend over.
And they would expect the woman to be cooperative, and regardless of what she's doing, whether she's busy cooking or whatever, when her husband calls her.
Look at the example that he gives. Regardless of whatever she's doing, whether she's busy cooking or whatever, when her husband calls her to bed.
For that particular act, she should be ready and willing to engage. What
is this? Some kind of porno? Where like the woman is in the bent over in the kitchen, and he says, "I want it right now," and he has the right to take it. Is this some kind of like non-consensual thing? It is a non-consensual thing. It's funny how they keep talking about how bizarre it is that the West is so obsessed with sex, and how he's also going to bring that up at some point. And at the same time, their men are allowed to rape their own wives. I hate this because I hate how it makes Arab and Muslim men look to the outside world, because most of them are not like that. Most of them have some level of respect in the marriage that is beyond what Islam allowed them. But this is what Islam allows.
The woman in marriage itself did not have so much rights as we might expect of women today, and we would argue for today, even within the Islamic context.
One thing I want to pause here. Wait, I want to go back a few seconds. So just to make things clear, one time I said that it's his daughter interviewing him. I don't think this one is his daughter. I think it's another one, but I think it's equally horrifying. Well, not equally, but it's still very horrifying being a young woman, or a woman in general, hearing this being said to your face, especially when you believe that there is some degree of truth to this. And one thing I want to comment on is this comment right here saying, your morality is subjective. You can't complain. Why don't you call your mother or sister to bed then? So I've answered this so many times before. There's a video that I have. I'm going to try to, please timestamp this so I remember. I'm going to try to put a card up there somewhere about it. And it's called Whataboutism, the Sixth Pillar of Islam. And I've addressed this in a couple of different points in that video. This idea of how Muslims always bring up, and could be non-Muslims as well, but usually in this kind of discourse, it's Muslims who bring up something irrelevant, like you have subjective morality, or they switch the blame to something completely different when we have them dead to rights agreeing to something horrifying like this. Now they want to talk about morality, and they want to talk about the source of morality, and that's a whole nother discussion. But I don't need to. First of all, you don't have something called objective morality. You have never demonstrated your God to begin with, and even then, is that really an objective morality? That is the dictated morality by the creator of the universe. But that's never been demonstrated. And even if it were demonstrated, we can see the harms of that so-called objective morality. It doesn't mean that it's the best thing for us as humans. your God might claim that it's the best thing, but it's not what we observe. So you can still choose to believe your God or what you think is your God, but it doesn't change the real life observations. And once you take out of it the component of believing in this God and fearing it, we have zero reason whatsoever to think that we should follow this so-called objective morality, hoping that it's for our own interest at some point against our actual interests as we observe them. So let me make that clear. And it's disturbing. It is disturbing and not a good look that every time a Muslim would bring up sex with animals or sex with family members or whatever as some kind of gotcha to change the conversation, it's not a good look for you. And by extension, it's not a good look for me, because people keep forgetting I look like you. I have the same names as you. So what you're doing reflects poorly on me and on people I like and love. So stop behaving that way. And yeah, this is a comment that says, not ideal, but that's how it is in the Quran. Why? Is Shabir projecting 21st century morals? Big time. And I'll talk about what I think about that. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I will comment on that further.
Of women today, and we would argue for today, even within the Islamic context.
Mhm.
When women did not have this full right, then it's not a far cry from the position of slavery, or we can say rather that the distance that we see between the free woman and the slave woman is somewhat
not so far removed,
minimized.
yeah.
Somewhat minimized. I may add to this
You see that the distance between a free woman and a slave woman is very minimal.
that the word for a divorce in the Quran is talaq, and talaq literally means release. So it is as if the woman
Interesting.
was in a situation here in which she might be released.
See, I'm always surprised that he's straight up actually bringing us these points, like the word talaq, meaning I hadn't thought of it, to be honest. I had not, because as a native speaker, it's just ingrained in my head. Talaq is divorce, and that's it. But it comes from itlaq, or talaq, itlaq sarah, whatever. It's releasing the person. So releasing the woman from, if you want to put it as mildly as possible, releasing the wife from his care, from his duty and care, but it's releasing her from the marriage as if she was a slave.
And what is often quoted as the last sermon of the Prophet, peace be upon him, may not be authentic, but nevertheless, these
May not be authentic, but nevertheless, the last sermon of the Prophet, the last khutbah.
words are collected on placards and sometimes put up in Muslim homes as the last sermon of the Prophet, most often.
That speaks to a larger point, which is hadith that Muslims always jump to say, maybe this hadith is not actually from the Prophet, maybe this hadith is so-and-so, and it's graded sahih, as in graded using the criteria that they use to grade hadiths as the most reliable grading. And they still would dismiss it outright. But when it's a da'if hadith that paints the Prophet or Islam in a good light, then they cite it all the time without even caring to double check. So hadith like an-nadafa min al-iman, cleanliness is, the English equivalent is cleanliness is next to godliness, but it's more about cleanliness is part of iman, or Islam. And that is a da'if hadith as far as I know. And the hadith about the Prophet, the Jewish woman who used to disparage the Prophet and throw trash in front of his house all the time. And then she stopped doing that at some point, and he was worried about her, and he checked in on her, and turns out she was sick and all that stuff. That's a da'if hadith. So yeah, why do people are biased, of course. They want to keep citing the things that make their Prophet look good, but they have to be specific and methodical. And that's the thing about, again, my transition from being a believer to a disbeliever is, when I was a believer, I wanted to be methodical. I had no choice but to be methodical, because it wasn't convincing to me when someone said, well, if it sounds bad, then the Prophet probably didn't do it. But what is bad? It's subjective, because others don't see it as bad and they follow through with it. And then we say they're bad Muslims, and then we separate ourselves from them while holding the same label and the same books. So yeah.
And they're found in mosques. And in that sermon, the Prophet, peace be upon him, urges men to take care of their women and be aware that God is overlooking them while they have this power over their women. The women are with them like slaves. That's the terminology that is being used. So we're
going to talk about
of course,
that.
They're not slaves. They're free women, and they're married. They're what?
Of course, they're not slaves. They're free women, and they're married, and they're wives. But what is the difference? He keeps reiterating that they're referred to as slaves, and the rights are the same almost. That in terms of the rights of the husband over the wife, the husband has the same rights. So, what is the difference really? Why is he making that distinction without explaining? And unfortunately, if you're a Muslim and you're waiting for this word, once you hear, of course, she's not a slave, she's a wife, you're like, ah, yeah, he said it. See, so there's a difference. What is it? Quantify it. I mean, aside from the fact that, oh, even a woman leaving the house without her husband's permission, there's very strong classical opinions that that is not allowed. And again, we'll get to that later. There's a lot of tafsirs that I'll be reading later on.
But when we understand this broader context, we can see how the interpreters thought of female slaves as having a secondary status, even
He said, when we understand this broader context of what? Did I miss something?
below this, and that their consent did not matter in this relationship. They were fully owned, and the master had the right to.
So the broader context is that even the wives didn't have this right. So of course it makes sense that the concubines don't have that right. That's the broader context. I'm not sure how this woman is not pushing back on any of this.
All of the women.
So it sounds like this was more relatable in some ways to previous times. What about how do we understand this within our context today?
Yeah, well, we can say that because it's related to previous times, that prior to Islam, this was a normal practice. We know from the Bible in the book of Genesis that Abraham.
Oof. Okay. So I really was not expecting this the first time I heard it, that he would already point to other people were doing it too, and we know from the Bible, so and so.
Had a concubine, Hagar, from whom Ishmael was born, and Ishmael became the father of 12 princes, and God promised Abraham that Ishmael would be a great nation. So a great nation gets born from this kind of relationship, and nobody.
So he's saying, okay, first of all, there's whataboutism. So in Christianity, it happened, or, Christians, please don't start in the comments about how, I know that this part of the story is true, and it is carried forward to Islam, which is Hajar was his slave, his servant, and there's a lot more details to it. And hopefully I'll get to part 2 of the story of Prophet Ibrahim soon. But anyhow, he says that because of this incident, because of that, and God said there's going to be a great nation as descendants from that. So he's saying, see, a good thing came out of it. What does that have to do with anything? The fact that in one instance, a good thing came out of it. And if you believe, can you not believe as a Muslim that Allah could have had this, this same generation come out of a marriage, a regular marriage? The part of it being that the woman was a slave doesn't really change the outcome of this generation in a positive way. So what is he trying to say here? Unfortunately, they do this thing, these apologists, where they give you little factoids or little positive things, and they just inject them in the middle. And if you just focus on those, you forget that they have nothing to do with the topic.
Abraham was a bad man for having a concubine. Promised Abraham that Ishmael would be a great nation. So a great nation gets born from this kind of relationship. And nobody said that Abraham was a bad man for having a concubine.
That's saying no one saw an issue with it, so it's not a problem.
And the Bible seems to approve of it. In fact, there are other passages in the book of Exodus which speak about this possibility of a man owning a concubine. Moreover, the prophet Jacob, from whom we get the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, some of them were born through concubine relationships because Jacob married 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah.
Okay.
And each was in a competition with the other to get more children, and not so much to bear the children themselves, but each had a handmaid that they gave to Jacob to be mothers for his children and mothers of their children. So what children were born through their hand.
So I am letting this slip in a sense because this is about the historical roots of female slavery. Fine, but what was the question? I already forgot the question, honestly. What was the question that she asked? What does that have to do with today's context, right? That was during the time. Has he answered that question yet? Pretty sure the answer is no.
So this was not seen to be something bad or backward. It was natural for the time. So the question is for us today as Muslims, did the Quran prescribe something new here out of divine wisdom, or is the Quran just simply tolerating a practice which was already known before and which Muslims need to do something about? What the Quran encouraged Muslims to do was to free the slaves, and if Muslims continued to do that as the Quran recommended and even prescribed in some circumstances, then slavery would have dried up altogether in Muslim lands.
So he's saying the Quran has instructed us to free slaves, right? And that is true in certain situations. If you make a certain mistake or another, one way to make up for it is to free a slave. However, the Quran doesn't necessitate it. And he is blaming the fact that slavery continued Islamic slavery, legal Islamic slavery, continued till maybe the 1970s or 80s in Saudi Arabia and other parts of the world. And he's blaming that on Muslims not following that rule when he's never proven that it's um, because Muslims haven't followed the rule of giving up a slave when they make a mistake or another. He hasn't proven that. And if anything, they don't have to follow that rule because it's not a necessity to free a slave. And not only that, so I did a little bit of digging to find the answer. Let me pull it up on screen. The answer to the question, what about, oh, well, it's in Arabic. I'm going to pull it up on screen for perhaps a second and then go back to the video. So if you want to read it, it's probably going to be in the comments, sorry, in the description of this video, but I'll give you the summary of it. Here it is. You can go check it out yourself, and I'll read you the summary that I had put aside. So, قال شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية. So Ibn Taymiyyah says, if a man marries a woman knowing that she is a slave, her son is the property of her owner, with, and it says here, with the consensus of al-a'imma, the imams. So that's from Majmu' al-Fatawi. So if a man marries a slave and has a child with her, the child goes to the father as a slave. So how are you going to dry out slavery, as he put it, if you keep making more slaves? Even if there is no more war, this is regulating keeping slavery ongoing. This is, you can't just scapegoat saying Muslims have not been good Muslims and that's why slavery didn't dry up like Allah intended. And if that was true, if that was the case, then the system itself that Allah had put in is pathetically failing. If it took 1400 years for Westerners, for secularists, for kuffar to do it for Allah, because he was so incapable of predicting how his followers were going to behave, not just how all humans in history, but his followers specifically, the ones that already have an in on Islam, if they cannot follow his rules according to this guy, then what a failure is this system. This brings us to the point where they always say Islam is perfect, humans are not. Well, if a system is perfect, then at least it will get some degree of success, right? Just like how there are countries now, like no country, for example, no ruling governing body is perfect, but some of them are doing better than others in many ways, humanitarian point of view, from an economic point of view. And the people aren't perfect there either, and the system is not perfect there either, but it has a better efficacy, it has a better efficiency, a better effectiveness. But Allah's system is failing miserably, and that is a sign that is not a perfect system. So you cannot scapegoat humans all the time. And more cases. So, and the explanation says her, let's see. I honestly, I don't know if I should translate this on the fly. It says, لأن ولدها من نمائها. I think it means because her son is from her eggs, or from her the equivalent of a sperm, but don't quote me on that. And that belongs to her owner. And here's the interesting part. I will let me post the link right now for people who want to read it. It is in Arabic. And unfortunately, some of this stuff has no translation. Let's see if the link goes. It'll be in the chat. And it says here, is this a punishment to the child? ما ذنبه? What is the child's fault? And the answer to that is, this is a part of tadbir Allah Ta'ala lil khalq. This is Allah's plan. And the difference in rizq, the difference in what Allah provided to people, this is normal. And his mom's enslavement has something to do with qada and qadar and whatever God had decreed. So it's not a punishment or a fault of the child, and God does what he wants. Wallahu yaf'alu ma yasha wa yahkumu ma yurid, and decides what he wants. Wa subhanah la mu'qaba li hukmihi wa la radda li qada'ihi. No one can make a judgment higher than Allah's. So it's basically saying, no, it's not the child's fault, but it's not a fault at all. It's just what Allah decreed, and God said so. Exactly, because God says so. So if you want to get to the bottom of Islam, it's because God says so. And what God says does not agree with what apologists are saying. So Shabir Ali so far has not told us anything. He has not answered the question about historical context. He gave us historical context, but what about today's context? He didn't say anywhere where this is supposed to end. He just gave us this empty excuse about Muslims didn't adhere to the rules, otherwise, slavery would have died out by now.
A valid practice. And you will find to this day that there are Muslim scholars of some of the highest ranks and most respected in the Muslim world, who continue to say that rather that it is a shame that we have abolished slavery and this is a divine right that God has given to the believing men to have female slaves. And so theoretically for them, it still is applicable. And not only theoretically, but they state so in clear terms that if there is a war between Muslims and non-Muslims today, and the Muslims capture the non-Muslim women, the non-Muslim women will be made slaves. And
so something to note here, in the description of this video, it's talking about how this came to be because of, what was it? I don't know, maybe if it's not in this description, maybe I'm mistaken about that. But I'm pretty sure there was a mention, correct me if I'm wrong, about ISIS and slavery, that the way that ISIS is practicing. Yeah, here, Daesh's use of sex slaves. So he has not answered why Daesh's use of sex slaves is bad. Now we're getting to the part of him saying a lot of prominent scholars believe very, very much so that it can happen again and it should happen again in case of a war. He said it himself. So did he explain why it shouldn't?
Of course, the men would have right to sexual congress with them. So somebody like the groups like ISIS and so on could be following this sort of ruling which is there. So they're not all nuts for thinking that they can do this. They're following.
That's exactly what I say all the time. That's exactly what I say. A lot of people end up falling for bad ideas because of religion. Islam is not the only religion that can cause that. It's just the general concept of something held with a stick over your head, a gun to your head, that you have to believe that God said this. He just spelled it out. Some of these people, it's not because they're nuts, because they're sick people. It's because they believe Allah told them this.
Religious rulings. But we should say that those religious rulings are wrong. They're out.
Look at how long we're 11 minutes into an 11 minutes and 30 seconds video, and he says we should say that these religious rulings are wrong. He did not say why.
Of place, but we should say that those religious rulings are wrong. They're out of place. They failed to see the context, the historical situation in which.
You failed to show us why that context is different. I mean, we can clearly see we're not at times of war right now, thankfully. But when there is a war, like where Daesh is, that's exactly where it applies. And that's exactly where we see it. So we cannot distance ourselves or like Muslims cannot distance themselves and say, let me rephrase that. Muslims want to, and I understand why they want to distance themselves from Daesh, because they're not like that. But they cannot distance Islam from Daesh, because that's exactly what they're utilizing in the way that it was used at the time of the Prophet, exactly the way that it should. One could argue that Daesh is their original intent to start this war or to participate in it is wrong, or that they're doing it for the wrong reasons, and that's a whole debate that people will actually disagree with you on. People who live in the West will now disagree about whether the Taliban is doing what they're doing is right or wrong. There is unfortunately a lot of, especially Pakistani people, who, be it for political, cultural, nationalistic reasons, religious reasons, they think the Taliban is A-okay. So this is not just some kind of remote part of the world problem where you don't have to worry about this. There is support all over the world for these people. So him saying it was a different context and they're wrong, and speaking for 11 minutes without telling us why. What is the difference in context? Where does Allah say that we will adapt? How can we use and weaponize Islam against those so-called extremists? And what is an extremist when you think about it? If you're an extremist about, for example, being a vegetarian, that means you just never, or vegan, you just don't want to consume or use any product that had any animal being harmed at any point, right? You can take that to the extreme. And maybe if you do something like vandalize something that has to do with animal cruelty, then I don't know if that would even be past extremism, because you're not applying the concepts of veganism to the extreme. But here, they're applying the concepts of Islam to the extreme. So is that really extreme or applying Islam as it's supposed to be? So I don't understand the word extremism when everything is within the bounds of Islam. Sure, it is the extreme end of Islam. Does that mean that Islam in itself has a lot of potential for harm? Yes, it does.
which these rulings were first explicated.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
Not perfect, because he didn't answer anything. He just said it's a different context and we shouldn't be doing this anymore, and we should be telling those people, no, bad boy, you should not do this anymore. Well, thank you for saying that from the comfort of your masjid in Canada, where you have rights and where this woman thankfully doesn't have to be locked up in her house. So let's go to the next video. So the word ba'al, when he mentioned it, it took me on a tangent about Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 228. And that one, I just went too deep into that, and I kept researching a lot of tafsir, and I will read that in a little bit. But he did mention that that verse in one of his videos, so I'll try to find it here. I have a list of several videos that I want to go through today. So one of them is Islamic marriage unfair to women, and are Islamic divorce rules unfair to women? So 2 videos. I'm going to start with the first one about Islamic marriage being unfair to women, or is it unfair
Welcome
to
to
women?
Let the Quran
Okay, this is a little louder. So,
Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. Today, as part of our series on controversial issues related to women, let's explore the topic of marriage in Islam. Is the relationship within a Muslim marriage similar to modern concepts of equality of the sexes, or are women disadvantaged in such relationships? Is there a need for Muslims to rethink some of the patriarchal elements that survive in their marriages?
mhm.
Let's sit down and get right into this controversial yet important discussion with Dr. Shabir Ally. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So when we started our series on controversial issues related to women, we talked about, that Islam looks at women in a positive light. We talked about the need for ijtihad, like critical thinking. Do you think that's needed in the area of marriage?
Yes, definitely. When we spoke about the positive features, we
I don't remember that, so hopefully we'll come across it in another video. The positive features of Islam for women.
saw that Islam actually, at the time of the Quranic revelation, made great advances in the rights of women and the way in which women were viewed.
Remember when I told you to write it down every time or count how many times he mentions previous contexts, and this is one of them. Amber made a very good point here. She says, let's ask an old man if we should give women rights. Let me see if I can highlight that. Yeah, there we go. Something, yeah, what did he just say?
We saw that Islam actually, at the time of the Quranic revelation, made great advances in the rights of women and the way in which women.
So something that they always fall back on is things were so awful for women back then. They were burying women alive. They were they would kill their female infants. That things were just so bad, and without actually, we never really get to verify that. A lot of these sources that claim that things were so bad in the days of Jahiliyyah, as they call it, ignorance, they don't really cite anything except other Muslim sources, which, how convenient. But let's presume that is true for a second. I gave this example in a very old TikTok of mine. The Ford Model T is one of the first mass-produced cars, and it changed a lot of things about the automotive world in general, including how cheap it was to manufacture them on an assembly line. Does that mean, I mean, it changed conditions and it made life a lot better for a lot of people. But in a sense, it also sent us down a path of over reliance on cars instead of public transportation. So it did improve things at the time, but was it a good shift or a good improve altogether after however many years, maybe 100 years now or something? Not necessarily. It depends on the context and so on. But more importantly, okay, let's say it did improve things for the better permanently. Let's just presume that is the case. And I always like to take a lot of different scenarios here. If that is the case, then should we just keep applauding the Model T forever? Should we be driving around in Ford Model Ts? Absolutely not. They're very inefficient. They're very slow, very dangerous. So they're a thing of the past, and where it's time to move past them. So every time he says Islam improved conditions compared to the crappiest time for women to be alive, like, what are you patting yourself or Islam on the back for? That's such a low bar. So unless he can say, and therefore then we have a new version of Islam where it says, now let's improve on the current rights of women, which we never get. Every time they invoke this historical context fallacy of presentism stuff, they just remind us that this system only works in some kind of desert scenario, primitive scenario, where where we don't have the dynamics that we have today. So trying to adapt it for today is, I suppose, a noble cause, and I applaud him for trying, but he's not even doing that. He's just putting apologetics, he's putting on a nice face for it while not facing the consequences of real Islam, how it's really practiced. And I say real Islam meaning how it is practiced. So the way he practices it might be very, less harmful. I wouldn't even say very harmless, but less harmful. But that doesn't change the situation for millions and millions of people around the world. And I'm not even talking about in war zones. So what is he really saying here except this is an outdated religion that doesn't belong today?
And were viewed. But of course, the rest of the world continued to advance beyond that. And what has happened with Islamic law is that Islamic law tended to freeze with that moment in time of the first revelation, as if the whole world is going to stand still. And everything that was said in the Quran is going to apply exactly the way it was applied and understood at the time. And because the rest of the world continued to progress and develop, and we did not allow the child of Islam to grow, Islam as a child to grow and develop and be on par with the rest of the world, this is why we're finding a great dichotomy between the way in which Muslims perceive Islam today, generally with classical roots, and the way in which the world runs. And the solution for this dichotomy is for Muslim scholars to apply the principle of ijtihad, of sound reasoning, going back to our sources, but showing how they might apply to a modern context. And if Muslim scholars were to do that, then obviously we would not have this kind of dichotomy. We would be living Islam with the original principles, but applied in a new and different context.
So what he says here, and this video is from 2017, by the way. I don't know if there's an update about what he actually has done since then, but all he says here is that we need to look at the rulings and what the Quran says and what the Hadith says and all of Islam and do ijtihad, which some say would be bid'ah. So ijtihad is what is it? Personal effort, basically. Put in effort to interpret it in a different way. But that by definition, you just put in a human component in the middle. And we're always told that Islam is perfect and from Allah and so on. So now we're explicitly relying on the words of people in between Allah and us. And those people who are inclined to give us a more diluted version of Islam never make it to, at least so far, they haven't significantly changed the status quo. They have not, and they might never be able to change the words of Allah. How much twisting can you do of these words if at the end of the day you cannot change them? You're limited by something. So as much as I sympathize and empathize with him, he's really saying nothing. He's saying, yeah, we need to reconsider this stuff. It's like, inshallah, we'll see. It's been 4 years or 5 years since that interview. And in one of the interviews, I don't know if we're going to get to it yet, about hadith, he says, and not a hadith, like hadith as in plural, he says that, we need to go through the hadiths and, come up with a new collection and verify them in a new way, because the verification of sahih and da'if and hasan and so on are not enough. And we need to re-examine how they fit in today's context with the Quran and so on and so forth. And some of them don't even contradict the Quran, but they don't fit today. And that was from 2013, which is, 9 years ago? 9 years ago, he was saying the same exact thing, and nothing has changed, except that now we have more accusations against ex-Muslims and critics of Islam that we're taking things out of context when they've never changed any of the texts, really. So
within that framing of the conversation, do you think that men and women are equal in a marriage from an Islamic perspective?
In the classical view, no. And we have to be clear about this, because Muslims will imagine that what we are thinking today must be Islam, and that must have always been what Islam was thought to be. But the classical Muslim scholars did not think that women had an equal status in the marriage. They thought that the woman was actually somewhat inferior. and that the man had a lot of rights over
Wasn't somewhat inferior, was explicitly inferior. And don't go anywhere because I have tafsir over tafsir over tafsir about this.
over the women.
So are you bringing that perspective? Are you saying that it wasn't equal because of what Quran said about women at the time, or because of the interpretation, or like where's that
That's a good
perspective
It's
question.
coming
actually
from?
both, because some of what the
So that's a very good question. So why was there no equality there? Is it because of the Quran or about women at the time, or because of the interpretation?
Interpretation, or like where's that perspective
it's
coming
actually
from?
both, because
Both what? She said three things at least.
some of what the Quran says obviously reflects the conditions and circumstances at the time.
There we go again, at the time.
The past societies were largely patriarchal. Women had few rights, if any. And the Quran, in dealing with that society and situation and giving laws on how to improve the situation, could not overturn everything overnight, even though God is revealing the Quran. But if God wants to work with
Have you heard that? The Quran could not overturn everything overnight. Let's rephrase that. What is the Quran if not an extension of Allah? Right? The Quran is, in reality, the Quran is the word of Muhammad, or what Muhammad told us that Allah has said. So the source of the word, as we see it in reality, is Muhammad. But he's saying the Quran could not change things overnight, meaning Allah could not. Allah was limited by the situation at the time. When we keep when we keep phrasing Islam as made for that time, and Allah could not make the change any less gradual or any more immediate, that means Allah is limited. He's incapable.
everything overnight to improve the patriarchal. Women had few rights, if any. And the Quran, in dealing with that society and situation and giving laws on how to improve the situation, could not overturn everything overnight, even though God is revealing the Quran. But if God wants to work within the natural processes, then
So it's mighty convenient that God seems to work within the natural processes now that we have studied the natural processes. For example, creationism, and this applies to other religions as well. At first, it was God created things in this many days, or God, kun fayakun, God made it happen immediately. And now we have to reframe it, or they have to reframe it as, well, Allah worked with the natural processes, or this was his method. God's method of making things happen was the natural processes that we study today that go against the original interpretation of the text, unless you take the text to be metaphorical and you don't know what God actually meant to say. So he's saying here God had to effect change within the bounds of what is natural. So if you take God out of the picture, it's still all the same.
even here, God will have to go slowly here, because if you
Even here, God will have to go slowly. Will have to. God is constrained. God has no choice but to go slowly. Keep that in mind, because that does not make sense for a boundless, powerful God.
you're dealing with an egg, you have to treat it gently, lest you crack or break it. So in giving laws, God had to apply wisdom in giving the laws that could actually make some practical difference at the time. And the
Make some practical difference at the time. Let's presume, again, there's no source that says that it did improve things, no statistics or anything. But let's say it did make a difference at the time. Is it making a difference now? Yes, it's pulling us back.
classical case of this is the issue of slavery, which is not unrelated to the condition of women, um, but thinking about slavery, why wasn't slavery abolished in the Quran from day one in a simple declaration from God? The answer from Muslim scholars is that that would not have been practical. You have to change the entire economic system to make it possible for slaves once released to.
So yeah, so I've heard that a lot before. God is constrained by the economic system going on at the time. So even if I grant that to God, I am a generous God. So I'll say, okay, it had to be realistically, if God had said no more slavery, just like, no more alcohol, which he did gradually, no more slavery, then people would revolt and they wouldn't join Islam. I've heard that so many times before. Not just that it was going to be economically a mess, but people would actually say, no, I don't want to join if you're going to take away my slaves. That means that it's not about the truth, it's about politics, right? If it's truly about the truth, I will Like, let me tell you before anyone else, if this is actually the truth, if I genuinely believe that this is my purpose in life and this is what God wants me to do and so on, and the road to eternal happiness is through God, through Allah, through Islam specifically, I would have to live closer to the life of whatever the equivalent of a monk is in Islam. I would do everything with the intention of pleasing God and doing the right thing for everyone around me and so on. So why wouldn't I want to give up all of my slaves and just live a sustainable, smaller scale life? And if I was a slave owner, if I truly believed in this stuff, but it wasn't about belief, and that's why. What was the surah? Um, ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. The verse says, and you see people coming into God's religion in droves. That was after Fath Mecca, after the invasion of Mecca. So why are people joining Islam in droves all of a sudden? Is it that the truth was revealed all of a sudden they all believed it once the Muslims won the war? No, it's clearly political and it's clearly coerced to some extent. So God was unable to change slavery overnight or make a law about it because people wouldn't have liked it and it would have destroyed the economic system. But keep in mind that Allah, the All-Wise, could have come up with a better economic system. If we have political and economic analysts today who can devise a plan and fix things up in the economy, Allah wasn't able to do that. He just had to leave the status quo for 1400 years because he didn't want to mess with the politics and the economics of a deserted area with not nearly as many people as there are today, resulting in so many millions and millions and billions of people harmed because he just couldn't come up with a good plan at the time.
Have a reasonable income. So certain circumstances have to be accepted as they are, and you can only deal with them by gradual incremental change, not by a total.
Gradual incremental change. Let me remind you of something. Where is Shabir Ally right now? Or in that video? Well, I'm going to answer for you. He's probably in North America, probably in Canada. And that's not to dox him or anything. That is public information. And he says incremental change. This conversation is taking place in Canada in English. This incremental change did not come around. This change happened because of forces outside of Islam. No thanks to Islam, against the wishes of Muslims. So this incremental change, you have everyone but Islam to thank for.
Revolution all at once. And indeed, we can see that in the rest of the world, slavery took a while to be abolished, several centuries after the initial revelation of the Islamic message in the form of the Quran. And what has happened in Muslim societies is that Muslim scholars tended to resist the abolition of slavery because they thought that this is un-Quranic, because the Quran didn't actually say so. Now we have a parallel feature happening with, or phenomenon happening with the rights of women.
We have a parallel phenomenon happening with the rights of women. So the resistance to going against the Quran.
Rights of women.
Or what they perceive to be what the Quran says.
Has advanced as the human rights in general that led to the abolishment of slavery. And Muslim scholars have tended to resist the advancement of women's rights because, again, their thinking is not Quranic. The Quran didn't actually say so. And to add to this, the modern Western societies have gone further in not only advancing the individual rights, but throwing away what they would regard as the yoke of divine revelation and law. And
that's a good point. So there's a lot of resistance to change in Islam because you don't want to cross God. You don't want to step on God's toes or God's words. And he just casually mentions all of this, and I like that he acknowledges it, but he says nothing about what actually needs to be done. The whole lecture, and like the other one as well, was just talking about this is what the classical interpretation says, and he separates himself from it, and he says we need to change that. Nothing about how we need to change that. So the answer of the question is yes, Islamic marriage is unfair to women, and the change that we got, the progress was from outside sources, and there's a resistance to change. And he doesn't acknowledge the fact that billions of people have been harmed because of this resistance. Let's just presume that God actually meant for this incremental change that never came about because of Islam. That means that God failed. That means that people suffered because God's system could have been tweaked a little better, a lot better, but it wasn't.
and so they promote a kind of liberal way of life that includes sexual promiscuity. To
Wait,
them,
wait,
it's
wait,
a
wait,
form.
wait, wait. What does that have to do with anything? Let's go back a few seconds. So he's
And
talking about the resistance that of classical scholars or just scholars in general to want to make that progress and go against the Quran because they think it goes against the Quran.
so they promote a kind of liberal way of life in
Who promotes? Let's go back.
individual further in not only advancing the individual rights, but throwing away the what they would regard as the yoke of divine revelation and law. And so they promote a kind of liberal way of life that includes sexual promiscuity. To them, it's no longer something shameful or.
So he's saying those scholars, he's kind of playing devil's advocate all the time without actually taking a solid position. He's saying that those scholars are worried about throwing away the yolk, as in like the middle of an egg, the yolk of Islam or of fiqh or whatever it is that he's talking about. And at the same time, embracing the whole shebang, everything about sexual promiscuity and everything that comes with liberalism, which is, I suppose he means like the freedom and rights for people to do as they wish, as long as it doesn't really harm others.
Sinful or even objectionable in some cases. So Muslim scholars looking at that, and not only Muslim scholars, but Muslims generally may be thinking, look, we can't go the way of the modern Western society because altogether with the advancement of women's rights, look what they have done to society. The woman has become not only liberated, but she's actually in a reverse way, at least for some women, they have become enslaved to the passions of men and to the desires of modern Western society.
Okay, look at how weaselly this point is. Okay, my respect for Shabir Ali kind of is like a sine wave. It keeps going up and down. So I empathize with him for trying to effect change, but he's already backpedaling and using the same points as apologists do and somehow appearing different to them. So he's saying because of this progress has actually turned into the opposite way because women in the West are subject to the desires of modern Western society. He's saying that it's good that Islam has held on to its tradition because look at what happens when you go completely the other way. He's not saying it verbatim, but what else could he mean? What is the relevance of this at the point? And let me just put it this way: the rights of a woman and the quality of life of a woman under Islam versus under the whatever system you want to call it in North America, where he is in Canada, the woman in Canada wins every single time. And if she wants to be a Muslim in Canada, she gets a chance to. She can do like him and pick and choose how much of Islam to follow. But to say that somehow this is the negative, and thankfully there's still the traditionalism because that has saved us from this the modern Western society is slaving women. We're talking about literal slavery. He himself has said in the other video that the woman has no right to refuse her husband as his wife, and her status is almost close to the slave. And he has the balls, the audacity to bring up this metaphorical enslavement of women to the desires of men. I mean, no one has said that patriarchy has faded away completely, or that women don't face hardships in the West, or they don't have their own flavor of problems that comes with. True, like women are overly sexualized everywhere in the world. We're talking about women that in his religion have to cover up, or else they're going to be seen as pawns of the devil to entice men. And you're talking about women being overly sexualized in the West. You cannot play that game. You cannot just be somewhere in the middle and try to reap the benefits of both sides somehow. And what benefits are there to Islam? What are there? Because all he's saying is those somewhat bad, regressive classical scholars, they're not moving with the times. But also the times, look at what happens. Women are slaves again. What is he talking about? And there's someone who keeps repeating this. It's interesting. I always get this response from believers. Did you learn the law of fiqh? So one of the things that I like about this channel that I hope is communicated very clearly is that you don't have to be a scholar to discuss these topics. And hear me out. It doesn't mean that you should just pull up interpretations that you decided and you make up new meanings of the word, or you use an incorrect meaning of the word and you say, this is actually what Allah meant. No, I go by whatever the scholars say. And that's why I'm listening to a scholar who has presumably studied these laws. So asking me whether I studied the laws as some kind of gotcha doesn't do much, because I'm literally listening to what he's saying and using my brain to analyze it. If you see a mistake with something that I'm saying, feel free to point it out. But to gatekeep and say, well, I think that's the implication of this comment. Well, you need to be an expert to talk about this is incorrect, because you don't need to be an expert to adhere to the laws of Islam, and you don't even have a choice to it in many cases. And even if you're a believer, in many cases you don't have a choice because you think this is what God is asking you to do or ordering you to do. So you don't really have a choice, even if it goes against your own judgment, against your own mind. So part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is to make this kind of discourse more accessible to the average person, to break down what they're saying and make you realize, even this very educated man and every person I bring in this Dissecting Apologetics series, no matter how much education they have, whatever they say, what comes out of their mouth, you still have the right and responsibility to think about it and analyze it, and not unfairly. I think what I'm doing is very, very fair. And just like a regular person, a layman is supposed to adhere to the laws of Islam, they have every right to discuss them and try to understand them. And as someone whose life is affected by Islam, like so many people in the comments, so many people who watch me and who don't have a chance to watch me, of course we get a chance to talk about it, or we should. So I hope that makes that clear. Let me read some of the comments. I'm going to get to some of the super chats. Sorry, I just don't like to interrupt the flow sometimes, and I do want to acknowledge them. So PZ is saying your content is considered rational, reasoned, and compelling. Keep it up. PZZ as in Z, not Z. PZ, I guess. No American rubbish pronunciation. So I learned both, like some of my teachers, some of my books that I was reading from in middle school and high school were British and some were American. So mine is a little, of course, I sound more North American, but sometimes I have words that I pronounce the other way. But anyway, thank you for the super chat and for the compliment. And Samara008 says, again, thank you for the super chat. What about Khadija? Wasn't she an independent businesswoman? Wasn't she rich, the richest of Quraysh? Married 2 men before Muhammad. Wasn't she his boss? How can he claim women didn't have rights before Islam? That's a very good point. And they used Khadija dishonestly, because they say, look, Khadija was his wife and she had all the rights in the world. No thanks to him. He came around and she was his sugar mommy, basically. She was Muhammad's sugar mommy, first sugar baby in Islamic history. So yeah, you cannot attribute all these rights to Islam, and you cannot say that women had no rights. I mean, one can say, and they usually do, the apologists say that this is an exception. So it wasn't usually the case, but you can't use it the other way around as well. Again, it has never really been proven that the situation was that dire everywhere. We don't have statistics that show that this improved the conditions of women. If anything, they seem to remain victims, according to the own admission of Aisha. And I'm going to show you a hadith later on about that paints an image of how Muhammad didn't really handle these disputes the way that you think he should have. And another super chat, thank you, PZ, this time. In 1962 in Saudi, wasn't it just the slaves were freed and the owners compensated rather than slavery made illegal? To be honest, I'm not quite sure about the date, and I'm not quite sure about the system, how it happened. I don't know for certain if it's actually now illegal in Sharia in Saudi Arabia. That's a very good question. I know that it is, according to whatever the UN agreement that Saudi Arabia had signed sometime in the 1970s, I believe, that they're not supposed to have that anymore, and it was kind of abolished by the 1980s. But whatever it was, up until the 1900s, the late 1900s, it was still around Islamically. So what incremental progress is Shabir Ally talking about? I have no idea. And Really Shady, thanks for the super chat, says, The West over-sexualizes women, and Islam solves it by caging them in hijab, similar to how birds can get eaten. So we solve the issue by caging them and then eating them later, unfortunately. All right, let's get back to the video.
Women have become used and abused, especially the passions of men. And
So women in the West have been enslaved to the passions of men and used and abused, compared to what the picture that he was painting about women around the time of Islam and to this day in classical interpretations of Islam, which is outright literal abuse and enslavement.
To the desires of modern Western society, women have become used and abused, especially in the pornographic industry and in prostitution and so on.
So when he's this is a bizarre point. I kid you not. I had a call with a faith counselor in a university somewhere. I'm not going to tell you where, but it's in a secular country. It wasn't where I was. I made a long distance call because it's 2020. Was it 2020 at the time? 2019, whatever. And I had some questions for the person, and he was in his late 20s or early 30s. He was the imam of the mosque at that university, or the whatever, like the Muslim student group. And he just started rambling the same exact kind of ramble that all of these apologists have. I was asking him vague questions. I didn't get into the issues of Aisha, for example, her age. I didn't get into those issues that are supposed to trip up anyone or meant to. It was just big picture questions, and he just went on this spiel because he knows that some of the contentions have to do with women and so on. And he brought up pornography, and he brought up exploitation of children, and he brought up a bunch of weird things that have nothing to do with the topic. And I had to resist the urge to say, what child exploitation? Your prophet married a 6-year-old. But I held back because I wanted to hear what he wanted to say. And obviously it was a whole bunch of nothing. So what Shabir Ally is doing here is shifting from the classical interpretations to talking about, oh, look, pornography is bad for women and prostitution and so on, when the same kind of things happen, but behind closed doors, according to Islam, legally, and in much higher numbers. So what is this whataboutism?
So
you're talking about that from the perspective of commodification of women and based on society and what's happening with.
You can tell that she has taken some gender studies course, or she's read into that kind of stuff based on some of the language that she uses. She's trying to push him to use that language or to frame it that way. Okay, yeah, commodification of women, it's a bad issue. What does that have to do with Islam? How did it fix it?
Yes, and looking at this, Muslim scholars, and sometimes Muslims more generally, recoil from the advances that modern Western civilization has achieved in terms of women's rights, and they want to hold on to the original pristine, pure Islam as they understand it to have come from.
Let me hear that again.
And sometimes Muslims more generally recoil from the advances that modern Western civilization has achieved in terms of women's rights, and they want to hold on to the original pristine, pure Islam as they understand it to have come from the 7th century of Arabia. So they don't want any change in this regard. So there is a great need for us to not see a dichotomy between these two things, but again to see a third way, the third way being that we together with the modern world are all thinkers. We share a very common thinking base. There are so many advances in human thought that feed into all of our minds, whether we like it or not. And while our religion teaches us to take what is wholesome and good and to refuse what is foul and evil.
No, the religion does not teach that. The religion says that in a vague way, do good stuff. And that is very, very subjective. Just like everything that he was saying about how those scholars think, not even classical scholars today, everything he's saying came from a reasonable mind to some extent. I mean, they're not saying this because they're bad people. So to say that in their mind, they are doing exactly as Allah instructed, which is take the good and leave the bad. So the Quran didn't teach us, or Islam didn't teach us how to take the good and leave the bad. It vaguely says, like in many other things, be fair, take the good, leave the bad, but not exactly what is good or bad. And when Allah is not clear, then that results in a lot of issues. And let me tell you something, my frustration here is not because I'm seeing him trying to improve Islam and I'm like, no, you should not improve Islam. Let's keep it as the barbaric backwards thing that it was. No, it's because he's not doing that. All he's doing is putting on a bizarre display of whataboutism and PR and empty platitudes of, yeah, we should make progress, we should, but what are you doing? You haven't even outlined what method do we use to make that progress. How do we dismiss a bad belief? Like how do you respond to the usual Muslim talking point about, well, how are you going to take your brain instead of Allah's wisdom, or Allah's words? This is bid'ah. How do you this is objective morality. Why are you messing with objective morality, and so on? And I have answers as a non-Muslim. He does not as a Muslim, and I was hoping that he did. I mean, I'm kind of on his side in a sense. People keep saying I want to destroy Islam. Well, it's kind of one of the outcomes that would happen if you're someone whose mind has been opened by learning something about Islam, or it's already been, there's a lot of questions going on, and you hear answers that make more sense outside of the paradigm of Islam, or the ecosystem of belief, then you're very likely going to eventually realize that there's no reason to believe that this is true. But if you somehow remain in the religion, but you take away the bad beliefs, that's fine by me. That's more than fine by me. It doesn't mean that I'm going to stop pointing out the absurdities in religion, for example. It doesn't mean that I owe you to say, like, no, this part is not absurd. I'm sorry, you fixed the bad stuff, so I'm just never going to talk about the absurd, even if it's not harmful. I'm never going to talk about the supernatural and the illogical, even if it's not outwardly harmful. I still will. So in short, I want him to keep doing what he's doing, but have some basis for it, because all you're doing is going around in circles. And it frustrates me going to the comments and reading a bunch of, thank you, you clarified everything. And I'm like, clarified what? All you did was just shut your mind and think, whatever I'm doing with Islam, whatever my so-called peaceful Islam is, whatever amalgamation I have of Islam, that is good. And you haven't really addressed how nothing is being done about the millions and billions of Muslims who have the bad belief. So it's frustrating to me. So please, man, throw me a bone.
We need to draw that distinction. Yes, we will resist what is foul and evil, but the advances in women's rights by themselves is not un-Islamic. In fact, it is very Islamic. And this is the very thing that Islam was doing.
There we go. Here we are capitalizing on things that Islam didn't do.
It is the very thing that the Quran was doing in the 7th century.
Advances to women's rights is very Islamic. So he's saying the concept of giving women more rights than they used to have is Islamic. Therefore, whatever is going on as a result of outside factors, not because of Islam, that is also Islamic. Let's take credit for that. Somehow, or let's just say that it's compatible with our religion, when even if theoretically it is compatible by some interpretations, if you take some verses that say do good and, leave bad, then why hasn't Islam accelerated or even helped or even not stood in the way of this? Nothing. Just to say that there is a way it could be compatible without outlining that way doesn't do anything.
Women's rights, but to the point that it could make a difference in the society at the time.
Again, at the time, he's saying Islam did that first, but it was limited to whatever was at the time. So we need a new version then. We need another Islam. Like God should send another messenger to add on to whatever improvements he made the first time. But to give us a system that only worked incrementally, allegedly, if at all, allegedly, right? If his view of incremental change or improvement was what he described as the enslavement of women, then how much better is that? It's time to ditch that system.
Rather than being merely theoretical, that would be entirely rejected at the time because it will seem so fantastic and incredible at the time.
So just to bring it back now to the...
Before you bring it back, just to bring it back, what he was saying is the Islam and Allah were limited. They couldn't make radical change at the time, so that's why it had to be incremental. But again, since there wasn't a game plan for the long term, it's not a surprise that it didn't go past that incrementation. Where's the improvement? That's like saying that you released a new version of a software that fixes some bugs, but you haven't updated it in 1400 years. congratulations on fixing the bugs the first time. You can't say that software updates are compatible with your model of software development. I mean, in a sense, they are, because you released a bug fix one time. Good job. But that doesn't say that you have any credit or compatibility with the system of releasing regular software updates.
Idea of marriage. In what ways, for someone who might be thinking, well, Dr. Shabir, I don't know what you're talking about. In what ways are Muslim women disadvantaged in the current marriage system from an Islamic lens?
Well, there's several things, and we'll talk in more detail in other episodes about polygamy, which is an issue, and divorce, which is actually related to marriage. But looking at other issues, one of the issues is that there is no minimum age prescribed for an allowable Islamic marriage.
Thank you.
A boy or girl could get married very early. For a boy, this may not prove to be much of a problem because he always has the option of divorce. The woman did not have the option of divorce. She could seek a dissolution of her marriage, but that's a long process, and it requires taking her case to the Muslim court, or in a modern context where Muslims are minorities, maybe taking it to a council of imams or something like this.
So, two things to comment on here. We're going to talk about more details. Trust me, I just never can throw everything at you all of a sudden. Either we're going to go through his next video about divorce in Islam, and then I'm going to use that as a segue to the tafsirs that I'll talk about, or we'll get to it soon. But what he's saying is the woman doesn't have a right to divorce. And he keeps saying, or at the time, or like didn't have in the past sense, but it is the Islamic way. The woman doesn't have a right to divorce. So if she feels like, I want a divorce for whatever reason, she has to go and make a case in front of a judge and hope that the judge is fair. And they always say this, but before I get to that point, in an Islamic world, in many Muslim countries, that's how it has to go. That's the way that it goes. And if you're in a secular country and you happen to be born into or live in a community of Muslims who do take the council of imams as the legal authority when it comes to legal matters within the Islamic framework, you still have to do that. You can be in the UK and you can't divorce your husband Islamically. I don't know what the legal repercussions are in terms of if you actually want to go to a British court and try to get a divorce there. But once you sidestep this Islamic process, you have lost your community. You're not only a divorced woman, which comes with a lot of stigma and shame and suddenly kind of nakedness because of the constrictions that you had on you, like, for example, the constriction to work in many cases, and now you don't have a job. And on top of all that, like, you're supposed to bear all of this and also be ostracized. So just by virtue of being in the so-called West, it doesn't really excuse anyone from, or doesn't excuse all women. Sorry, no, it doesn't resolve the issue for a lot of Muslim women. So to say that the issue is, or to think that the issue is far removed from us and it's somewhere else out there in the world is incorrect. It's appalling. And if you're someone, Muslim, ex-Muslim, non-Muslim, who lives in a country, you should be horrified that this is allowed to happen in your country, all because of religious freedom, or because we're too afraid or timid to discuss how barbaric and backwards this system is. And I don't care who it offends, but this is a backwards, barbaric system. And if someone wants to take that and apply it to Islam in general, or religion, or many other religions, be my guest. It's just call a spade a spade.
But for the boy, he can just simply utter the word divorce, and he's freed from a marriage that he does not like. So the woman can be quite disadvantaged in this situation. Now,
not can be, the woman is quite disadvantaged. Stop softening the blow all the time.
We speak often about the consent of a woman in marriage, but that consent does not apply to minor girls. A girl could be married off by her father or her grandfather without her consent.
So this is an Islamic principle.
It is well known, and it is classified and codified in Islamic textbooks dealing with Islamic law.
From dating back previously, right? That this was.
This is very early, yes. Okay. And
she's trying to, I don't know, maybe she's not trying to, but she's bringing up the point again of this is from the older times, dating back. So at least we know, yes, it has always been done this way.
Some will find even a Quranic indication of this. And in fact, it is not only in Muslim societies that girls got married.
There we go, pulling another. Other people were doing it too, but he okay. Listen to this and tell me if you notice his sneaky move, whether it was intentional or not.
See, right? That this was
This
the
is very
case?
early,
Okay.
yes. And some will find even a Quranic indication of this. And in fact, it is not only in Muslim societies that.
Do you notice that? So he says some would find a Quranic indication to this, as if it's not explicitly in the Quran. Not some. Anyone with half a brain who can understand can see that this is explicitly in the Quran. And then he says, he quickly shifts. And it is not only in Muslim societies. Some find it in the Quran, and it's not only in Muslim societies. They were doing it too. Look, Mom, he did it first.
Girls got married early, but also in other societies as well in ancient times. Because nowadays we know about the pressures of
In ancient times, exactly where Islam belongs.
modern life.
Or at least Islam as it stands, how... Well, see, that's the thing. I feel like sometimes it's unfair to say Islam belongs in the ancient times. And Christians, please don't rejoice, because your religion is not that far off. You're just lucky enough that you didn't have as many constrictions on progress. So from a personal point of view, I find it absurd that God couldn't relay a perfect message, and now we're trying to figure out what the hell he meant. And there's a lot of influences from outside of what God said and all of that. But whatever you're doing, just, keep at it. Just don't have harmful beliefs. But when I say Islam is regressive, people use that as a weapon against Muslims. When Muslims are better than Islam, I still maintain that. But my reluctance, I don't know if I should have that reluctance, because everything this moderate apologist da'wah person is saying is falling back on the classical interpretations and then sprinkling a bunch of, but we need to change that, since 2013 or however long he was doing this for. So when he throws in ancient and whatnot, and other people were doing it too, well, you're still doing it. You're still doing it.
Not only girls, but boys as well. They have universities to attend. And typically by the time they're 25, they're done with university. Around that age, they start looking to get married. But in ancient times, people did not have all of these modern pressures, and their great contribution to societies would have been to get married, have children. They increased the number of the tribe. The tribe became larger and stronger. So each individual was contributing something to the growth of the tribe.
Something to note here, in one of the videos I made about dissecting Yasir Qadhi's apologetics, I think it was the one about blasphemy killings. I may have not titled it Dissecting Apologetics, but it's in this playlist. And he explicitly said that at some point that it was good for increasing the numbers of people in Islam. Something was good for increasing the numbers of people in Islam. Here, Shabir Ally is talking about the general concept of, in societies, they wanted more kids so they can be stronger and so on. He doesn't really mention that this was almost explicitly a point in Islam. So yes, he's right. This was a thing in other societies, but also it is a thing in Islam. And it was never said that women at some point need to get out of the house and learn and get an education and follow their dreams and so on, while also respecting their marriage. Like, no one's saying she should follow her dreams and abandon her family, but there isn't as much room left for that in Islam, or it's not explicitly said that this will be gradual progress and anything like that. So you can't scapegoat everybody except for you.
And women in particular, that would have been a great contribution to their tribes by getting married early and having children.
And that stuck. The purpose of a woman being a housemaker only has stuck.
Also, people were mindful of their daughters in case their daughters might become pregnant outside of marriage. So a safe way, especially in honor and shame societies, was for them to get their girls married early, and that meant that whatever happened now with their daughters happened within a marriage, whether for good or bad. But
whether for good or bad. So he's saying, because these societies, he doesn't acknowledge whether it's the shame and honor culture is bad. He doesn't mention anything about that. He says, well, because societies were all about honor and shame that is tied to a woman. He doesn't even mention that a man could get a girl pregnant, or a boy, a 17-year-old, whatever age, the son could get a woman pregnant, and that's shame to him and his family. No. He's just talking about explicitly women. And in his defense, he hasn't explicitly said, and I condone that, but he didn't say I condemn that. And he's saying that's one way to keep it all within the bounds of no shame and honor is retained, whether for good or bad. The girl being pregnant young. Can you see how insidious what he's saying is? I don't understand how I'm maybe one of the few people picking up on this, or maybe there's a lot of people like me, but we just don't get to express our views. Every drone in the comments, it's upsetting to me. Every drone under these comments videos are Jazakallah khairan, this is amazing. Even non-Muslims, they're like, oh wow, I've never heard someone put it so eloquently. Aside from the ones who are obviously role playing, there's a lot of role playing. I'm not even a Muslim, but this is amazing. There's a lot of BS there. But there are verifiable non-Muslims in the comments saying, I'm a Christian, or I'm a whatever atheist, but I find this so beautiful. Are you not listening? And that's proof that it's not about Muslims being deficient in intelligence or anything like that compared to the rest of the world. No, humans are impressionable. Humans are easy to push one way or another with charisma, with the tone, with the nice sentiments, with misdirection, with whataboutism. So everyone is culpable there. I'm sure I've fallen for a lot of these things and still do. It frustrates me to see people not notice this. So he's essentially just brushing off the fact that people marry their girls younger because it brings shame if they were to get pregnant, for example, outside of marriage. But he doesn't say that it's a problem, that the men are not shamed for that, or that the shaming culture is bad in general, or that this could lead to harm. He says for better or for worse, like it's not a big deal. It could lead to harm, that girl being married off young. But that harm is not as bad as the shame and that it brings the family and the dishonor and so on. It frustrates me because I don't know who's my ally here. Like, who can I support in this whole so-called reform of Islam when they're all, sheep in wolf's clothing? No, wolf in sheep's clothing.
But it at least alleviated that aspect of shame from the family of a girl.
I think obviously there are a lot of issues, and I think I'm going to unilaterally decide that we need a second episode for this. But just as we wrap up, do you still think, in light of these brief issues that we talked about, and acknowledging that we'll probably need to have another episode where we talk more about the issues, that Islam still views women in a positive light, as we framed our initial discussion?
Well, yes, but here by Islam, I mean my conception of what Islam is.
Thank you for saying that explicitly. His conception of what Islam is, it has a positive, or paints Muslim women in a positive light. His conception of what Islam is, which he hasn't even defined, he hasn't really defined. All he's getting at is that it's influenced by his reason, which is a good thing. It's influenced by his reason and outside influence of the culture around him, which is exactly what Muslims would viciously attack him for if they were actually listening to his words. So he hasn't outlined what it is that his conception of Islam is, or where he derives it from when it comes to within Islam. Because if he starts deriving it from outside sources, or from his brain, or from whatever it is that hasn't been explicitly built on Islam, it will be dismissed by the rest of Muslims, and it's not going to be real progress.
Involving the Quran as the basic teaching of Islam, understood against the backdrop of its historical circumstances. And
so he's saying that framework is just looking at the Quran made sense in historical context, and now we can dismiss what we need to make it work for today's context. Again, bold move, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off.
Now reapplied to a modern and changing situation. So yes, this sees women in a positive light and will embrace many of the rights and responsibilities that are recognized for women in a modern context, so that the Muslim does not find himself or herself in this kind of cognitive dissonance between seeing what is right and thinking that Islam does not allow that. But if we're thinking that the classical view that Muslim scholars had about women, that this is equivalent to our modern concepts, no, that's wrong. The classical Muslim scholars did not see it this way, and they did not think that women have equal rights.
Okay, so he sums it up with saying, yeah, the classical Muslim scholars, But again, throwing in the word classical distances him and today's Islam or whatever, or this image. Let me not say today's Islam. This image that Islam is trying to paint in the West or to the outsiders, it paints it as a distant thing, the classical interpretations, when they're with us today all the time. In the majority, if not the majority, it's not even. I mean, a lot of Muslims aren't aware of them per se, but when they are made aware of them, what can they do except conform to the majority? So, oh boy. All right. So there's a hadith that Rami here has linked, and I put it aside, and it's going to be relevant in a little bit. So remind me if I don't bring it up. This is here where I'm going to go on a tangent when we talk about the divorce rules in Islam. So this video right here, I found so many bizarre things going on this tangent, and honestly, that was last night. And I thought I'm just going to skim these videos and take some bullet point notes so I don't forget anything. And then I found myself 2 hours into reading a bunch of different tafsirs just under the same verse, and the things that I found were, let's just get into it.
Issues related. On our show today, let's discuss the topic of divorce from the perspective of controversial issues related to women. Is it true that it's easier for men to give a divorce than women?
Yes.
Is it more difficult for women from an Islamic perspective to get divorced?
Yes.
Let's sit down with Dr. Shabir Ally to learn more.
One thing I want to note here is that they asked the question, and because of the way, the tone of Shabir Ally, because of how the woman is smiling and nodding, because of all of this stuff, it seems almost as if the answer was given, and the answer is not really. But that's not true. The answer, he almost explicitly says, yes, that's what Islam says. But we need to change that at some point. Just, put a pin in it.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we're talking about controversial issues specifically related to divorce. So what are some of the general rulings / process around divorce?
Mm-hmm. First, I would like to say that the matter of divorce in Islamic law is a very complicated one.
They always do that. They start with, it's complicated. It's complicated. Yes, I understand that it might actually be complicated, but it always is used as or very often is used as some kind of a cop-out, like, but even though it is complicated, all you need to do is focus on just one or two cases where just leave all the complications aside, all the other possible scenarios aside. Sure, you may not know all the scenarios and all the rulings, but focus on the one example that he would give, for example, and just dissect that, and you could still find fault. And because perfection is hard to defend, because Islam claims perfection, all you need to find is one fault. And I think we found many and many and many
different schools of Islamic jurisprudence to deal with here. And because we don't have a systematic outline of the procedures for divorce in the Quran itself.
Okay, so that's a good point. So the Quran, for Quranists out there, or people who say the Quran is all you need, the Quran doesn't show you everything that you need in Islam. So you have to rely on secondary sources, which are a lot more flawed and more man-involved. And I say man-involved as if the Quran isn't man-involved. But the first one, let's presume that the Quran was actually just from one source, Muhammad. Let's just presume that for a second. Everything else is hearsay. And he himself starts to doubt the authenticity of hadith and so on. But we need that stuff to figure out the procedures of divorce, for example, because the Quran did not outline it enough. So how are we falling back? Why is everything in Islam not from Allah? What is from Allah except for some poetry and some bizarre stories? Really, think about it. That's the problem with Islam for me. One of the big problems is that it's not actually objective in any way. Even if I believed it was from Allah, every ruling, every single thing is contended. And there's the ikhtilaf al-ulama, they disagreed, the scholars. And we're told that it's only the minor things, but the bigger picture things are not contended, but that's also false. So it's built on a bunch of lies.
Or in any particular hadith clearly and authentically attributed to the Prophet, peace be upon him. Scholars have had to piece together verses of the Quran and reports about incidents of the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions, and try to come up with a comprehensive understanding of what are the procedures for divorce, when does it take effect, when not, and so on. And that has...
Oh, another thing to note. So scholars had to do this over time and agree and debate and disagree and piece together, as he put it, from a lot of different sources, from a lot of different times. So for hundreds of years, and possibly even later. I mean, all this information wasn't disseminated to all Muslims in the world at the same time. So many people were wronged by having only one interpretation that could have been more unfair than the other ones. I mean, all of them together are very unfair. With the slightest, the most watered down ones are still very unfair, and we're going to get to that. But there are times when, even if you believe that some of them were better than others or closer to the truth than others, people lived and died on the wrong, so-called wrong interpretation. Whose responsibility is that except for Allah and His very, very weak transmission system? In today's world, we are able to send a message to every single person on earth to a higher accuracy. I'm not going to say every single person, but a bigger percentage of humans on earth can receive one message today. It's going to take a lot of effort and coordination and a lot of governments getting together and a lot of technology, but it is possible. And Allah, over 1400 years, still is not able to tell us what the hell He meant. So how do you defend that?
Has led to multiple opinions on various
Multiple
stages
opinions.
regarding this. And just to give you an impression of that,
I'm sorry I'm interrupting a lot, but every other word he says, I have something I thought about. There was a verse about ما كان لمؤمن ولا مؤمنة إذا قضى الله ورسوله أمرا أن يكون لهم الخيرة من أمرهم. It is not for a believing man or woman if Allah and His Prophet decree something or judge something, that they would have an opinion in the matter or a choice in the matter. So we're saying there are opinions about what God meant or Muhammad meant or said, but there's a verse specifically about how what they decree is final. But what is it that they decreed? Who knows? And this is what I mean by when someone says, for example, Islam says stay away from the bad and take the good, that is subjective. So what did Muhammad mean? That is subjective. So follow what Muhammad says. Did Muhammad say blow yourself up in this case? Or did Muhammad say throw yourself into battle and die for God, which he has said? Or did Muhammad say don't hurt people for this reason? Everything falls. You can make an excuse or find a justification for so many different opposing things in Islam. So when someone uses a verse or a hadith to show you proof as if here, this is abrogated by that, or here, this is according to this hadith, you're not supposed to be mean to your non-Muslim neighbor, but according to 10 more, you are, you're entitled to do this, this, and that. So taking one little interpretation doesn't just make the issue go away. We have to address the other interpretations that enable the bad behavior according to the same texts. And that's my issue with apologetics. They always cherry pick without considering the other side. And they accuse people like myself of doing the same thing the extremists are doing by being thorough in my case. I want to address the bad interpretation, the so-called bad interpretation, and figure out why you think this doesn't apply anymore. It's good that you think it doesn't apply, but why? So we can standardize it so that we don't have people misunderstanding all the time. So as he put it, there's contradictory opinions even about divorce ruling.
We have a book here entitled Muslim Law of Divorce by K.N. Ahmed. And you can see it's a hefty volume.
It is a
of
very hefty
1,100 pages.
And the way that they laugh about this and they just dismiss it, see how laughter can change your mindset very quickly? They just dismiss it like, it's so funny that we don't even know what God meant.
And leaving the complications aside, let's look at what becomes controversial now for Muslim women. Why does it fit with our series here, in which we're saying, okay, we need to go back and look at certain issues. We have to apply ijtihad and look at the spirit of Islam and come up with a sort of paradigm shift that deals with the new realities that we're confronted. We can't just simply dish out the same old rulings as before because they do not fit with our modern context. So one of the issues that
again, that sentiment I agree with. Good. I want you to make things fit better in the modern context. How are you actually going to do that?
Is very clear is that in classical Islamic rulings, the divorce was exclusively the right of the man, and the woman had very little say. She just is told that she's divorced, and then lo and behold, she's suddenly divorced. So she finds herself helpless in that situation.
And I've heard this is applied. Like I've heard of stories where this is applicable today as well. So is it true that only men have this exclusive right? And I've also heard, I'll just add, I've also heard basically all men have to do is say the word divorce 3 times, and that's it.
Thank you for bringing up that question. I don't think either of those people, or at least her, I don't think she's dishonest or trying to frame things a certain way. She truly believes that Islam is good, and she's trying to. Sometimes you see the actual critical questions come up, and this is a good question. This does happen. This is literally how the law is applied today. So his weaseling out of it, saying classical, classical, what about today?
Forced.
And the triple divorce becomes especially problematic because there's a verse of the Quran which says,
Did he answer the question? Did he answer it? Let's go back.
So is it true that this is applied? Like I've heard of stories where this is applicable today as well. So is it true that only men have this exclusive right? And I've also heard, I'll just add, I've also heard basically all men have to do is say the word divorce 3 times and that's it. They're divorced.
and the triple divorce becomes especially problematic.
Where's the answer? So to add on what she's saying, I've heard stories. The reason why she's heard stories is because she's in Canada. Maybe the stories were from actually in Canada, people who adhere to the religious laws still, or stories from back, I'm presuming, in Pakistan or somewhere else. But these are not stories. This is the reality legally of women in so many places in the world, including in secular countries, if they adhere to their religious laws. This is not a case of vague stories here and there. This is actually how it's done. There have been more modern laws introduced by way of secularism to result in khula, for example, like annulling the contract of the marriage and so on, but they're not straightforward like the divorce proceedings for a man. So why is he suddenly jumping to the case of talaq 3 times? He hasn't answered the question. Maybe he's going to get to it later, but notice that quick shift right there.
3 times and that's it. They're divorced.
And the triple divorce becomes especially problematic.
Becomes especially problematic. Who made it especially problematic?
Because there's a verse of the Quran which says "Talaqu marratan," the divorce is twice, and then if he divorces her, now this is understood now to mean like if he divorces her a 3rd time, then فَلَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ مِن بَعْدُ حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرَهُ. Then she's not permissible for him anymore until she marries another husband.
So that is something that we will discuss in a bit. So there's 2 kinds of talaq. Talaq is release or divorce. There's the talaq al-raj'i, which means it can be reversed. So that's if the man says talaq or anti talaq, that means I have divorced you. If he says it twice, that means I have divorced you, but he's still like once or twice he can still take it back. But if he says it 3 times, then that means that they're officially like completely divorced, and then that means that she has to marry another man and sleep with him before the other man can divorce her and she can go back to her husband. And that happens sometimes. So this was, okay, so I used to watch these soap operas in Ramadan. I don't know if they're called soap operas, but the Arabic ones in Ramadan. That's a huge thing for some reason. It's a cultural thing where every Ramadan there'd be a lot of series to watch. And there was one from over a decade ago. I think it was I think it was on, I can't remember if it was NBC or some channel like that. I think it was an Egyptian show, and it was called Al-Hajj Mitwalli. And it was about a guy who had like a Hajj, an older man who had like 4 wives, and he kept divorcing and marrying, and it was some weird ass drama about that. And there was, I remember an episode, and again, I was a child, and I was like, wait, this is weird, but that was Islamic. There was an episode where he had angrily divorced his wife 3 times because of some disagreement, and then he wanted her back. And in these characters, these women characters are portrayed, and maybe sometimes they actually do behave that way. She's like, oh, okay, well, thank you for taking me back, but now I have to go marry someone else and then have sex with that other person, then you can take me back. How fucked up is that for women? Think about that. So he messed up by divorcing her 3 times, and then she has to go and sleep with another man, which is not. What if a woman doesn't want to? Against it's maybe not against her own will in the sense that she is choosing, like she's saying she's agreeing to this course of action, but she's agreeing to it because that's Islamically what's supposed to happen, and she wants to get back to her husband because that's her source of income and life and stability. So now she has to sleep with a strange man, or maybe a man she knows. She has to sleep with a man so her husband can take her back because of this stupid rule. And the point of this rule is that The man doesn't hastily divorce his wife 3 times and then it's final. But what did it do when the man does actually lose his temper and divorce her 3 times? And is that the kind of man that you want to be with? Is that a good husband who deserves to take his wife back after selling her out to another man to have sex with and then divorce her? And what if the other man doesn't want to divorce her? She's stuck there too. You see how vicious this cycle is for women? You see how these laws, thankfully it's not always applied that way these days, but this is how it is from Islam. So he just casually starts talking about this point and he doesn't acknowledge that, yes, this still applies today. So stop saying classical scholars, classical scholars.
إن طلقها فلا جناح عليهما أن يتراجعا.
And the way that the Quran phrases it, لا جناح عليهما, as in there is no what was junah, like shame or blame. There is no blame if they want to go back together if the second husband divorces her. What if he doesn't?
And then if he divorces her, that means the second husband
So
divorces
she
her.
can't divorce him. He has to divorce her.
Yes. Then she becomes lawful for the previous husband. Now there is no harm if the two of them should.
No harm. And the word la junah or no harm or la darar, that is not about harm to the people. That is about the harm to Allah somehow, or in Allah's eyes. So there is no harm in the eyes of Allah if this whole scenario happens. No harm. But if Allah had a lick of empathy, if he understood, if he sat with a therapist for 5 minutes to dissect what the hell is wrong with Allah, he would realize that this is very damaging to everybody involved, or can be very damaging to everybody involved, unless it's some kind of weird communal open relationship. And then Muslims have the gall to talk about the relationship dynamics of people in the West when this is somehow allowed. Like no one thinks. And a big problem here is that we always hope, or at least they frame it as if Allah put in measures by saying in this verse, you have to be fair. Allah said you have to be fair. So see, he said you have to be fair. But reality is people are not fair, and men are not wise, and men are not honest, and that's not how it works. So when you give the rules that create the condition for abuse or for harm, and then hope that the man is not going to harm, or hope that the situation won't turn sour, you caused the situation. Even if you put a clause in there to save you, to cover your ass, basically saying, but the man has to be fair. The reality of it, it's not going to happen that way most of the time. The woman is going to feel some kind of pressure. And if she does love her man, in this abusive dynamic, and he divorced her 3 times and she wants to get back with him because she's abused and that's the only life she knows, especially if she's born, like if she's married young, especially that. So something to keep in mind here, Islamically, to this very day, it is allowed to promise your daughter, like get her engaged to a man, and she hasn't hit puberty yet, so she has no say in the matter. Islamically, she does not even get to say no as a child. He consented on her behalf. So imagine how many women have been put in that situation, which, by the way, since we're talking about this, there's this charity called, let me pull it up, Too Young to Wed. So I'm going to post a link to that. It's in the description already of this video, Too Young to Wed. And I hope that you check them out and donate if you can, because it is a charity that helps women or girls who are married too young and were able to escape, or help them escape and help their families and educate them and feed them. And this is the kind of thing that we need to be doing to fix what the hell Islam is causing in this world, or enabling in this world. This is frustrating because hearing him talk about this is launching my mind in so many different directions about how all of this stuff he's not addressing. He's simply saying, look at how modern everyone else is around us here in Canada. Let's be more like them. Right. How?
Reconcile. And what this implies.
The two of them should reconcile after this whole play of her having to sleep with another man and then hope that the other man divorces her because he has rights over her, the other man now. After all of this, they should reconcile. Not the man should solve his temper issues because he's the one who divorced her 3 times. They should reconcile. Men are sleazy as fuck in Islam.
Sometimes is that see, there's the idea of a revocable divorce and an irrevocable one. If a man utters a divorce, saying to his wife, "I divorce you," now that's once. If he does it twice, that's fine so far. I mean, not fine, but it's still revocable.
That's fine.
He can still take his wife back.
Not take his wife back. We're going to talk about that in a second. He has the right to take her back against her own will. We'll talk about that in a bit.
But if he divorces her the third time, this is like the 3 strikes, you're out. It's over and done with. It's final, unless she marries somebody else and then somebody else divorces her, or if somebody
Then they
else
can
dies,
get back together.
then the 2 of them can get back together. Why this ruling? Perhaps we should stop to think about, because it seems a little bit odd. Why this kind of complicated procedure? So the rationale is not given in the Quran itself, but some scholars.
The rationale is not given in the Quran itself. So God set this weird wife swapping system and doesn't explain why. And now he's saying some scholars
applying their thinking have surmised what the Quran has in mind here is that
what the Quran has in mind. Now the Quran has in mind what Allah had in mind. Let's correct that. What Allah had in mind but couldn't articulate.
Let's say a woman is in a difficult relationship, but she's keeping it together either for the sake of the kids or out of embarrassment or whatever. She does not want to let go of this relationship.
Out of embarrassment or whatever. Again, you see how he just skims over these points. So what he means to talk about, and if I'm going to put words in his mouth, it's because he hasn't put words in his own mouth. Out of embarrassment of the divorce, because it is shameful in the community. Because one of the things that I'm going to quote in a little bit is, it's one of the things that God hates is talaq. It is halal, but it's one of the things that God hates. So it's pressure on the woman to the point that it's shameful for her. And he just says, oh, maybe it's shameful and that's why she stays, and just moves on from it. Instead of addressing that, okay, even by saying in today's context, it should not be shameful and there's no problem if a woman needs a divorce. He doesn't say any of that. He just skims over, well, maybe she stays because it's shameful to leave, and then just moves on. Do these people have no empathy? You know, these verses that keep repeating about, do these people not think? Do these people not feel, not ponder? I feel the same way, but back at them.
Or she just simply loves her husband. We know that there is such a thing as a battered woman syndrome, that even though the woman is abused, she still stays in the abusive relationship. So if a man is going to divorce his wife back, and take her back again, take her back again, he could do it like, umpteen times, and the woman may remain with him. So the Quran, by stipulating this, that 3 strikes you're out, means that the woman now finally has to leave that relationship.
You see how this was twisted? So, to be honest, that is a point that I didn't get a chance to deeply look into. He's saying some scholars have surmised from that the Quran was thinking, which is Allah was thinking, that the wisdom behind this is that so a woman doesn't get abused by being divorced and taken back, and divorced by and taken back. There's a hard limit on it, right? There's a hard limit on that, and that is for the sake of the woman, so that an abused woman with battered woman syndrome or Stockholm syndrome doesn't just keep being stuck in that cycle. So the cycle is broken after 3 times of divorce, or 3 times of uttering the word of divorce. This is for the benefit of the own woman. Now, the interpretation that I've heard is because so that the man is naturally jealous, so he would think before saying it 3 times and making it final. That's actually making it final. And if that happens, he has to take a very big ego hit and let his wife sleep with another man. And this is a way of keeping the family together. So think about it. The way that this man has anger issues, or this man wants to separate, and the woman has no say in it, as Osiris has reminded me, the woman has no say in it. And we're going to talk about specific sources in Islam that say the woman has no right in here. So the man has anger issues. The man is the cause of this divorce 3 times. And now the woman has to go and now Allah is worried about the ego of the man. So the way to fix this situation is to have him take an ego hit, and then they should reconcile together again. Do you think the man is going to be any nicer of a husband after his wife has slept with another man? Do you think that kind of person, after after his wife had been through that, do you think she is going to feel the same way about him? Do you think that this family is going to be healthy again after this bizarre play had taken place? More often than not, no. Unless it's a shell of a woman who has only been brought up in this cult and doesn't understand reality outside of this, and that's a very sad existence. So why is it always from the perspective of a man, his anger, his ego? He doesn't discuss any of that. And I feel sorry for the woman sitting across of him, that she either doesn't have the presence of mind or the freedom or the time to think about this. I can't believe no one else is spotting this.
Because it's not good for her. The man has been divorcing her again and again.
Oh, it's for her own good.
Enough. And the hope is that she will, by marrying somebody else, find happiness in a new relationship. And
that's not how it works. That's not how it works, or at least there's enough of instances where what happens is because of societal and pressure, familial pressure, and so many things, she has to go back to the husband. So she just takes part in this play and goes and has sex with someone else, gets married and then divorced, and then goes back to her husband. It's not that she's going to find a good man and then stay with him. Usually that doesn't happen. Because what is a woman going to do if, according to the verses that we're going to read, her whole life is centered around her kids, her family, her husband? He provides everything. What is she going to do as a divorcee? She's going to be desperate to, and especially with the stigma and the shame that he glossed over about how divorced women, they don't want to be divorced because the society is going to view them differently, and men are not going to want to marry a divorced woman more often than not. So how is she supposed to suddenly get out of this, be on her own, and find a good man? More likely than not, they're going to find a man for her to sleep with and then go back to her previous abusive husband.
And in the end, the outcome is good for her. So the Quran has stipulated the 3 divorces maximum for this reason, for the benefit of the woman.
So I guess
remember this, guys. It's for the benefit of the woman. This is exactly the kind of gaslighting that Islam is just fantastic at.
My question here is, so it almost positions the woman as someone who's really weak, and therefore she needs a man to have these powers to then give her the courage and be like, okay, you're gonna leave. So why would if we say Islam is a religion that empowers women, why the situation, and why do women not have the same right?
That's what I'm saying all the time. When the power dynamics are set up that way, when the situation is primed for potential abuse, even if let's just take the perfect scenario where the man really regrets saying it 3 times, that's still a problem on his end. They need couples therapy. They don't need her to go fuck another man and then go back to him. So even in the ideal fair scenario, it's still not fair. And more often than not, you're creating the space for abuse. Even because we cannot fall back on humans are flawed and Muslims are flawed, and at the same time we leave the judgment to a Muslim, and then at the end of times God is going to make up for the abuse that she received, because he created the dynamic to have her receive this abuse forever and ever till she dies. And sorry to break it to you, but if you don't believe in the afterlife, I don't know if there's going to be some kind of evening the scales after we die, but I don't know if reward at the end of times really is evening the scales. Let's say there's an abused woman, right, who's been put in this situation, and even according to Islam, right, the husband has overstepped his boundaries according to Islam, which he had already. The boundaries were very far, but he overstepped them. So she has some rights that she deserves to take back in the afterlife, living a life of misery, and then going to heaven, and God is going to give her a bigger palace and make her a little prettier and all that stuff. Is that really making up for it compared to a woman, a free woman who lived a happy life, or a woman who wasn't abused, a Muslim woman who goes to heaven and gets the same rewards? Because once that scale of reward and punishment doesn't make sense, especially reward. If someone has $3 billion, can they not do almost everything they want to do compared to someone who has $10 billion, compared to someone who has $20 billion? So what reward is she getting? How is that making up for her abuse? Unless we say that everyone is getting the ultimate, endless amount of money or whatever resources. but that doesn't make up for the years of abuse, unless you think that the scale of eternity makes up for the scale of 70 years of suffering or whatever. That doesn't really even things out. It doesn't. That's not what justice is. So leaving it to the hands of humans and falling back on this as an excuse, what men are doing is because men gonna be men, is not okay. Is not okay.
Yes. So this is a very important question, and a lot of this has to do with traditional norms, the way things were done in societies.
Don't fall back on that. Don't fall back. Are you saying that Islam has to do with the norms?
Yes. So this is a very
To remember the question again, she was asking, why are these power dynamics set up that way? Why is the woman set up as the weaker person?
very important question, and a lot of this has to do with traditional norms, the way things were done in societies in the past. Not only
I'll let him speak, but basically he's saying it's because that's how it used to be before. So isn't it more likely that Muhammad just came and collected a bunch of norms and cultures and religions and made a new one? Or that Allah made Muhammad take a bunch of cultures and norms and religions to make a new one? You be the judge.
only in Muslim societies, but more generally.
See, other people do it too.
So what is the Quran doing here? The Quran is obviously trying to look at that situation the way it was and giving remedies for some of the most pressing problems, like, for example, the problem of a woman remaining in an abusive relationship.
Really? So this was set up to get women out of abusive relationships. Don't worry, I'm going to refute that in a second.
So the divorce is maximized at 3, and then the woman gets a chance to actually leave, because there's an impetus here for her to leave the abusive relationship and to find happiness elsewhere. It probably did not occur to people at that time that, okay, women can now have the opportunity to divorce as well. It was like one side.
Did not occur to people at the time. Are we talking about people or are we talking about Allah? She's asking, why has Islam set it up that way? And his answer is, well, Islam is looking out for the woman by getting her out of an abusive relationship in this one fringe scenario and setting up a lot of room for more abuse. But at the time, people didn't think about women being able to divorce. Where is your powerless Allah?
That's how the society thought. But do we have to always think that way? And this is where the problem occurs, in that our scholarship tends to be very conservative, and they try to keep things the way they were, and to refer to past rulings of previous scholars, and they refuse to think outside of the box and to look.
The box that is Islam. You want to know what the box is that's keeping everybody back? The box of Islam? It's almost poetic that he used that, because I'm pretty sure you know where I'm going with this. This is the box. You need to think outside of the box. This is it. Leave. Seriously, why are you trying so hard to squeeze every... Like, he's not even trying to change anything. He's just saying we need to think outside the box, but not realizing that contradicts his religion. Thinking outside the box is canceling everything that you just said. Show us how to think outside the box. Show us what precedent are you setting using what words of God? Because all he's saying, like, this guy is almost me. He's saying that the people at the time couldn't conceptualize of divorce starting by a woman. So Allah couldn't conceptualize divorce starting by a woman. He didn't leave precedent for that to happen in the future.
Realities of our present situation. Now, some scholars do, and they say that we can have a prenuptial agreement that says that there are certain circumstances in which the woman would have the right to
look at how many qualifications.
The realities of our present situation. Now, some scholars do, and
some scholars do
say that
we
can have a prenuptial agreement.
We can have a prenuptial agreement. We can have. Some scholars think we can have. That's 2 layers of possibilities.
That says that there are certain circumstances.
There are certain circumstances. There are 3 layers of uncertainty here. And have you heard of permutations, like in statistics, or a coin flip, for example? A coin flip is a yes or no, a binary 1 or 0, a tails, heads or tails. So for there to, first of all, to be someone who follows the scholar who has this opinion, that's the first option, the first possibility, the first coin toss, and then set up a prenup, that's the second coin toss, and then a third, certain circumstances, that three coin tosses. You know what is the chance that all three are met? I mean, if there's an equal chance for each, if it's just a coin toss, that's what's eight possibilities, right? 1 out of 8. If you're just as likely to go in either direction of the fork, this is a 1 out of 8 chance that you would encounter this situation. 1 out of 8 chance.
Is in which the woman would have the right to pronounce a divorce.
1 out of 8 chance with a very extremely generous estimation.
Like, for example, if the man takes on a second wife, that will be a reason for the woman to have the right and to pronounce.
So that reduces the chances even more. So the condition here being that in the prenup, you agree that he cannot have a second wife. So you cannot divorce for any other reason, except that if he goes and marries a second wife that you already agreed to. In what other culture in the world is that seen as some kind of virtue? I mean, in Canada, if the man wants to go divorce a second wife, that is illegal. I mean, sorry, marry a second wife, that's illegal. Or if he wants to cheat and infidelity, that's grounds for not just divorce. She can divorce at any time, but grounds to get more out of the divorce because it was unfair to her in the marriage. And he's presenting it as like a 1 in a million chance that, oh, look, in some ways you could get out of it.
The divorce in that case, so that there are some such stipulations that could be made in the prenup to give the woman the right of pronouncing the divorce.
What about someone, and obviously I'm a woman, so I wouldn't say this, but what about just playing devil's advocate for a second? What if someone says, well, in the Quran, I'm assuming in the Quran it says specifically about divorce, right? Like the 3 times and you're out. What if someone says, well, there's no reference to women having the ability to do that, so why should we entertain that for?
That's a good question. So if someone wants to fall back on the Quran, and why is she playing devil's advocate? The series is called, or the channel with 218,000 subscribers, how am I the first one to point this out, is Let the Quran Speak. So she's saying, to play devil's advocate, where is this in the Quran? No, this should be question number 1. Where is this in the Quran? You cannot play both sides. And unfortunately, it works. When the series or the channel is called Let the Quran Speak, and then they hear him say, we need some reform, or like we need to be modern, then they say, okay, it must be in the Quran then. No, you need to start from the foundations. Start with Let the Quran Speak. Speak the Quran. And earlier he said the Quran was thinking, or the Quran couldn't do this and couldn't do that. So he rarely talks about the Quran here.
Conservative scholar who says, well, I'm going to stick to the Quran. And
conservative scholar, how is that? I don't like these wordings anymore, because how is a scholar being, when we hear conservative or extremist or some other word, traditional, classical, it makes it seem like it has to be some guy in a regressive, like hidden away masjid with a ugly huge beard. I mean, he has a beard too, but like a very weird look. And we think about these like extreme cases, but that's just someone following Islam here. It's not conservatism to ask what is the Quran saying about this. That's literally the point of this channel. So why is she softening the blow that much?
There's nothing in there, and this is meant to be a guide for me. So if it's not there, why should I bother?
Good question.
Well, there are many things in the Quran which actually are not taken literally. Things are taken reasonably in the Quran. And one can give many examples.
One can give many examples of things that aren't taken literally. So his response to this is, it's not in the Quran, but you don't have to take the first thing as literally. Don't take God literally. Don't take him seriously.
The prescription that you should write a contract when you have a loan agreement. Scholars say that this is only given as a recommendation. It's not actually, it's not an imposition.
So if the Quran says you have to have a written contract, some scholars say it's not necessary. So they're overriding God's words. And you see how they always say, people use Islam for political reasons or for selfish reasons. Well, you let them use Islam, you let them mess with it. Sometimes you think it's legitimate, and sometimes when they do something you don't like, it's illegitimate. So in this case, if a scholar rules that you don't necessarily need a written contract, that's making things worse in terms of commerce and trade and so on, because now you have to rely on the word of men. So they've ruined something that Islam had done right. And then when they do the same process to make something else work, or follow the Quran to the letter, we say that they're misusing Islam. Which is it? Islam is a tool. You can use it however we want, and that applies to religion generally. And I like to remind my viewers, especially the religious from other religions, you're off the hook because I'm talking about this one specific religion. There are instances in history where yours was used the same way, and you were lucky enough that your religion doesn't have this hard stop on progress like Islam does. It doesn't mean that Muslims um, are all like, if they were actually following Islam, we'd be in bigger trouble. But I think Muslims are better than Islam, and sometimes they don't realize that what they're saying goes against Islam. But as long as they give us the space to point out that this is rooted in actual text, and we have to critique that text. So anyway, his defense is, don't take it literally.
It's just saying that this is preferable. We can cite so many examples in the Quran
Go
where
ahead.
something is actually given as a command, but scholars have taken it that it's only a recommendation.
So there are many examples that he hasn't cited, but of scholars disobeying God. And it's okay because in this case it's convenient.
Or something is given as a prohibition, and scholars say that too, it's only a recommendation.
See, what's the point of this guidebook?
Like, for example, there's a verse in the 24th chapter that says that a believer cannot marry an adulterous person. So, but what do we do with adulterous people then? If they can't get married, what's going to happen? They're going to commit more adultery.
So you notice here, that's something that our human logic has overridden God's logic. And then Muslims accuse us, ex-Muslims, of worshipping our desires or our brains or our logic. So he made a good point. And I'm not blaming him for trying to think outside the box. I'm blaming him for being weaselly about it and not having any actual religious basis, because basically he's an ex-Muslim, basically. So, and I think if you use your better judgment, you'll realize that there's a lot of things that you judge better than Islam as a Muslim, and that might make you like me. And you don't have to, but at least if you're someone who's promoting Islam, you need to. That's the thing. I'm holding him to a different standard than the average Muslim. If you're an average Muslim and you believe everything he's saying, hey, as long as you're being a good person, good for you. But he is promoting it actively. So no, you need to read the terms and conditions and tell us exactly how your version is different and how that is binding. So anyway, going back to the point, what was I even saying?
You do with adulterous people then? They can't.
Yeah, in this case, God had a blind spot. What do we do with adulterous people? Do they just, I guess, never get married, but then they're going to keep doing adultery? So now we've overridden God's logic. So why don't we just continue and just throw the whole thing away?
If they can't get married, what's going to happen? They're going to commit more adultery. Scholars say it's only a recommendation. You can actually get married to a person who has actually committed adultery.
So that's fair. So what do we do in a situation, for example,
not
where I know many women who are in relationships, and they want to get out?
So did he answer the question? See, I forget about the question because he just keeps going around in circles.
Out. What if someone says, well, there's no reference to women having the ability to do that?
So, okay, there's no reference in the Quran, and he says, well, then don't take God's words about divorce literally, I guess. So he started off this video by saying most of, or a lot of what's in divorce rulings is not from the Quran, and now he's dismissing the Quran. Now he's saying don't take the words of, don't take those words literally. So the channel called Let the Quran Speak is basically telling us that Islam is good based on what they're deducing from the world around them, not the Quran. Not the Quran.
That too comes with some kind of disadvantages for women, which we need to address.
Wait, what is it?
Here. One is that there is the possibility of a khul, which is,
For example, where I know many women who are in relationships, and they want to get out, but they can't because the guy is not willing to give them a divorce. So what do you like? What's the advice here if we're looking at taking Islam from a positive light, and that it gives women their due right?
Well, there are.
Notice how she said it. What do we do here? What's the advice here if we're looking at taking Islam from a positive light? Something about women. So they already have the conclusion, and it's basically Islam is good to women. How? Islam women when?
Gives women their due right.
Well, there are some recourses here. One is that there is the possibility of a khul, which is a separation from the husband initiated by the woman, and that too comes with some kind of disadvantages for women, which we need to address, and depending on how much time we have. But that's one way that the woman can seek release from such a marriage, and the other way is for her to
It's okay. I don't think he addresses it in the rest of the video, and I don't think we have time today because I have something else I want to show you. But it's weird that that is the main point here. How do we make divorce fair for women? He says, well, there's a way, and it has disadvantages, and no, not right now.
approach some religious authority, a qadi in a Muslim land, a judge, or in some non-Muslim lands, such as in Canada, where Islamic law is not being the governing law. One can seek recourse to a religious authority like an imam, who will then nullify the marriage after investigating the situation.
So investigating the situation. So you need to make a case for why. Rami, don't worry. I'm going to show your hadith in a little bit. The woman needs to make a case for why she wants a divorce. And what does making a case mean? We might come across some of those details, but it cannot mean something like we fell out of love, or we just annoy the hell out of each other and we just are not a good couple or not a good fit. That's not necessarily grounds for it, especially if the guy is happy with the arrangement of the woman, being a homemaker, and he's paying for her stuff, and she cannot refuse sex, as he put it, as this man put it. So in that case, the woman is stuck. So this whole idea of a qadi, no matter how fair and nice of a nice bearded man this man is deciding the fate of a woman's marriage, not even a woman's marriage that he's married to, a strange woman's marriage. This man, even if he's as nice as can be, he may not have grounds to give her that separation because she has no legitimate reason. So you see how the basic answer to all of this is yes, Islam is shit when it comes to women's rights, especially in this case about marriage and divorce. So just get to the answer.
So, for example, if a husband happens to be absent, the husband is not fulfilling his responsibilities as a
So yeah, these are the conditions.
as a husband, either failing to provide maintenance or failing to provide the satisfaction, intimate satisfaction within the marriage.
And keep in mind, this intimate satisfaction is not about. So I saw a cute feminist Muslima with a hijab, a loose hijab, and like like short sleeves. And the reason why I describe her that way is to give you an idea of how she's not exactly following the hijab, but she claims to be, and that's her right. But it helps us contextualize who is saying these apologetic points. And she had a video talking to some white girl about how Islam promises you orgasms in a marriage. This intimate satisfaction he's talking about, it's not true. There's a hadith that I'm going to bring up that's about, it's not about the orgasm or satisfaction. It's about, can you do it or not? Can you get hard or not? So yeah, let's just correct that.
The imam, after investigating the matter, could actually declare.
And how can he investigate that the guy gets an erection? He'd be like, okay, this is no homo, astaghfirullah, no homo, but show me how you guys do it.
The marriage to be null.
So, and as we, move forward with this conversation, how do we shift the narrative so that, like you...
Seriously, I had never thought of this before. How do you investigate whether a man is able to do it or not? Well, in the hadith that I'm going to bring up, there is a way, but it's not always the right way. Like it's not always applicable. All of this, a lot of it depends on the honesty of men specifically and the trustworthiness of men. So you're leaving the marriage of a woman in the hands of multiple different men, but not her.
You pointed out, we need to change the way even we view divorce and give women their due rights. So how can we as a society start to do that?
Well, it won't be easy, but
you see that kind of question always comes in the end. And it's always a vague thing.
Conversation needs to begin, and Muslim scholars need to be a very active part of this conversation.
2017.
You asked why women are not given the opportunity to have this kind of equal access to divorce. And the problem is especially pronounced when we deal with triple divorces, because what happens is that scholars following the traditional rulings will tend to say that it has to be the way it has always been. And that,
you mean it has to be what Islam says it is? I wonder where they could get that idea from.
Presents a lot of problems for a woman who finds herself suddenly irrevocably divorced. And
So Islam presents a lot of problems for women. Thank you.
sometimes tricks are used to get out of that difficult situation. Tricks not initiated by the woman herself, but sometimes by the very imams who are imposing that kind of traditional ruling. There is another ruling, which is also traditional, which says that if the 3 divorces are uttered all at once, then this is only considered one. And I fear.
Again, what is he? He's going on tangents that are irrelevant. So she's asking, what can we do to improve these conditions or to change the laws? And he's saying, well, 3 times is problematic, but some people think that if he said them 3 times in a row in the same fight, if he said, talaq 3 times right away in the same fight, then it only counts as one. Thank you. Wow, that has really answered the question, Sheikh. No answers
for that ruling, because that seems to go with the spirit of what the divorce proceedings.
It goes with the spirit that the spirit of it is it's supposed to calm down the man, and we're going to read that in a second. The 3 divorce rules supposed to calm down the man so he would reconsider, because women are emotional, as we all know, but men, they just get angry and emotional. And because the spirit of it is, this is our induction, our trying to understand it ourselves, is this wouldn't 3 times in the same fight means that he's not calm enough yet, so it should only count as one. Great, but that again reminds us that we have to try to deduce what is best for us based on what Allah allegedly says, when he's not even clear. So it's up to our own judgment. I trust my own judgment without the constraints of Islam, with the guidance of the experience of other people, of things that I have read, or of my actual real life experience. It's a lot better in my case and in so many people's cases than having the constrictions of Islam and trying to make sense within that framework. So yeah, if any Muslim comes at you and says you're worshiping your own intellect, you're using subjective morality and all that, theirs is all the same, just under the same umbrella of Islam, when they don't realize everything else is man-made. I mean, the whole thing is man-made, but even according to what is their understanding of God's word, everything else is not God's word.
Were meant to accomplish. But that aside, it still places women in that disadvantaged position. And when we're looking at this whole problem of ijtihad and how do we look back at the classical rulings and try to find the best application for them in our present times, we need to look carefully at this whole problem.
So his answer is, we try to find the best application of these rulings. He didn't say change the rulings. He said try to find the best applications for them, and we need to look carefully at the whole problem. That was in 2017. It's been 4 or 5 years maybe since then. I don't know if there's been an update. There's another video about him talking about hadith, and we have to revamp a bunch of things from 2013. No update. So this man is going to live and die, and all he's going to do is give PR to Islam, because he still hasn't really answered anything.
Of divorce as well.
Definitely a complicated issue, but
definitely a complicated issue. So now let's talk about the verse of today's stream. So let me pull it up for a second. Let me move this off screen. This is my face. All right. So far, I haven't seen anyone correct me on anything that I've said. And I don't think that what I'm bringing to the table is new. I'm actually surprised that anyone is listening to me, because I'm just listening to him talk and then commenting. And then I get a lot of accusations of not knowing what I'm talking about, or this man is a jahil, he's ignorant, he's not even a scholar. This is embarrassing for you and your religion, that I, who am not a scholar, can find so many issues in this. So many issues, and I'm just exercising my brain. So where are you, brains? Where are you? So let's see. Let me zoom in a little bit. I don't know if you can read this. Let me try to make it a little bigger. Can you read this to some extent? Let's see. Okay. Well, I hope you will, and I'll include the sources in the comments. Probably there's not going to be a lot of tafsir in English for a lot of this. So if you want to take it to someone to translate it, to double check my work, feel free. So here, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 228 says, المطلقات يتربصن بأنفسهن ثلاثة قروء ولا يحل لهن أن, to the end of the verse. So the divorced women remain in waiting for 3 periods. So this word, quru, we're going to talk about some of the tafsirs and what they say it means, but for now, let's just take it as periods. So if a woman is divorced, she has to wait for 3 periods to come and go. And in that time, she cannot marry somebody else. And if she is pregnant, she has to disclose that. And as long as she's pregnant, the husband can take her back right away. And then let's continue the verse. It is not lawful for them to conceal what Allah has created in their wombs if they believe in Allah and the last day. So, وَلَا يَحِلُّ لَهُنَّ إِن كُنَّ يُؤْمِنَّ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. So this part here is a threat. And as said by Al-Qurtubi and others, this is a warning and a threat. If you're a good Muslim woman, don't you dare hide anything. And in this case, you cannot hide that you're pregnant. Because you know what happens when you hide that you're pregnant? You go to hell. You're a bad Muslim woman. And if you don't hide that you're pregnant, that means your abusive husband or your husband who you don't like, it doesn't even have to be abusive. The husband that you don't like now has a right to keep you because you're pregnant, you and your daughter, your son. And if you don't do that, you're a bad woman. You see the amount of pressure that Islam imposes on women and on people in general? Even if the society around you is super peaceful and nice, if you're a woman who truly believes and truly examines Islam, you're going to be in a living hell because of this. So, okay, so to continue, and their husbands have more right to take them back in this period. So this is important. So in this period, so as long as the husband didn't say talaq 3 times, if he said it once or twice, and within the 3 months, the 3 periods, he has more right than her to take her back. And I'm going to show specific proof that that's what it means. He has the right to take her back against her own will. He divorced her and he can take her back whenever he feels like within those 3 months. And then it says, in aradu islahan, if they want reconciliation. And here the tafsir would say, if the man means it with bad intentions and not to reconciliate, then that's haram. He should not do that. But now you're leaving it up to the man to be honest about whether he wants to abuse her or not, whether he wants to actually fix the marriage or not. So this is kind of a cop-out because Muslims fall back on this and say, or by Muslims I mean like the apologists and the da'wah people and the sheikhs, they would say, see, Allah is fair. He only allowed this if the man is sincere. But who's checking? They even say no one can check. No one is able to verify that the man is sincere. So Allah created a dynamic that allows for abuse and just washed his hand of this. And I hope that when you hear me say Allah created this and that, you know that I'm speaking about whoever wrote this verse, about whatever body is responsible for this. I don't actually think Allah is up there allowing all of this abuse in his name or something. Otherwise, he's a failure of a God and he does not deserve any worship. He deserves scrutiny. And not because I'm rebellious, but because my brain cannot help but notice the issues here. My brain cannot help but be disgusted and revolted by how he conducts his religion or how he thinks is the perfect revelation should be like. And in that sense, Allah made me to be tortured, I suppose, because I cannot have a better opinion of him. Or rather, I have a better opinion of him than what he demonstrates. But let's get back to the point. And due to the wives is similar to what is expected of them according to what is reasonable. So this part isn't clear as much as it's clear in Arabic. It says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. So it's about their rights. The due to the wives are similar to what is expected from them according to what is reasonable, but the men have a degree over them in responsibility and authority. And I'm going to go into the details of that. And Allah is the exalted and mighty and wise. You see how there's always a little bit of ass kissing at the end? Allah is great and Allah is great. Just get to the point, man. And let's go into the tafsir here. Tafsir al-Jalalain says, so these rights or these reciprocated good things and rights, there are things like decent companionship and avoiding or leaving harm. So very vague kind of stuff. And men have a degree above them. They have a preference in the right and in the necessity or duty to their obedience to them, to the men, because of what they spent in dowry and expenses. So that's a recurring theme that you will see. there's always this men have precedent of rights because naturally they're the caretakers. Naturally, they're the dominant ones. They're the ones who provide as Allah intended it in the Quran. And they keep citing verse 434 in almost every tafsir. Verse 434 that allows beating women, that says that the men are dominant over women because of the money that they spent on those women. And then you hear feminists cite this whole like women are entitled to their own money, but what money? How is she going to get money? And women are the men are financially responsible for the women, but there's a recipe for disaster because now you're tied to the man and now he has rights over you that God said specifically is because he spends money over you. So how does it feel being, no, I want to rephrase that. It's difficult to try to shake some sense into some of these women because some of them might be suffering under the system, and that's why they cling to it so hardly. Like the battered woman syndrome that Shabir Ali had mentioned, or Stockholm syndrome. And some of these women, I want to shake the sense into them because they're outside of the system or they're not really tied to it, and they're making apologetic points for it, and they're enabling the abuse of their sisters in Islam, as they would call it. So, as a woman who has rights, someone in Canada, for example, like Shabir Ali and the woman who's interviewing him, what do you see that is good about this? Why do you keep saying the husband is financially responsible when you in this world, you probably have to work because, no one can survive on a one person income. Usually that's not how it works in today's day and age. But even if not, okay, good. You're being paid to be a wife and now you're tied to the system. It's not a right. It's not a bug, it's a feature that's designed that way. So let's get back to it. So it is said explicitly here, according to this tafsir, women have to obey their men. And this all happened because I found the word بُعُولَتِهِنَّ. Wait, was it in this verse? It may be in a different verse. We might get to that later. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it is actually here, بُعُولَتِهِنَّ. So that's their lords. Their husbands are their lords, their masters. Tafsir al-Sa'di says, this part of it says, maybe her husband regrets his leaving her. And that's why there's this period of waiting. And this period was made for him to slow down and reconsider talaq. Only in talaq al-raj'i, not al-ba'in. Only like within 2 times of talaq, not 3 times. So this is for the man to calm his nerves down. And we're told that women are too emotional to lead and too emotional to be intelligent and a lot of other things. And women have more emotional intelligence than, emotional hindering than men. But here we have to make a whole system for a man to calm down and take back his wife that he divorced. Do you see an equivalent system in the secular world where the husband has the right to berate his wife that way, hold this gun to her head practically of you're going to be on the street, you're going to be without a home, there's going to be issues in the family, there are kids, you might not be able to see them, or you'll have your kids but no monetary support, and then he could take her back when he calms down. Great. Islam is fantastic for women. So this here, this is in Tafsir al-Sa'di, this is a sign of God's love for the harmony, I suppose, between the husband and wife, and God's hatred for separation. So when you feel this imposed pressure by God to not separate, you're more likely than not going to be in a bad situation that you cannot leave as a woman. And here's a hadith. I have not, let me see the authenticity of this hadith real quick because I have linked it here. So yeah, there's a few different versions. A couple of them are da'if. One of them is sahih. So let me pull it up on screen. This hadith says, Messenger of Allah said, the most hated of permissible things to Allah is divorce. Allah hates divorce. And you say there's no pressure? Oh, well. Now let's get back to it. Yeah, and if it happens, if he wants to take her back after the 3rd time, then, she needs to marry somebody else and they need to renegotiate the marriage. And this part is talking about what are these rights, these exchanged rights that the men and women have over each other, and then the men have more. It says here that it has to do with the customs in that place and time. They have to do with the things like expenses, clothing, cohabitation, habitat, and intercourse. So it's all contextual. But then on top of that, it says here, men have a degree of height and precedence or leadership, precedence and leadership, increase of rights over the women. And here it's pointing to verse 434, الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are dominant over women, and also because of their money that they spend on them, but also because of the positions of prophethood and judgment, like being judges. So men are entrusted with positions like this. It's always a male judge that you go to for a divorce to beg him and plead him to separate you from your husband. It's always a male judge in every situation. It's always a male prophet. And that is explicitly here what the scholars use to point to, the males are in charge of this world. What are you even trying to deny? It's patriarchal by definition. Look at how God used males everywhere. So, and it says here, it's even like a hint of that, or a sign of that, is the man has twice of what she has in many things. It says في كثير من الأمور, in many matters, such as inheritance and so on, explicitly being said. Tafsir ibn Kathir. So let's go back for a second. So if you're a woman who, she's being provided for, so-called provided for, she's taking care of the house, she's only doing things that are allowed to her by Islam, by her husband as well, and she doesn't really have much of an income. Her money is her dowry that she got, which she might spend every now and then on some things, or she might put away, but it's not going to last forever. And then somewhere someone in her family dies and she gets an inheritance, she gets less than her brothers and other male relatives. She gets less. So now she has even less money, and now her husband has power over her because he's the source of food and shelter and everything. Even if she is being abused, and she can legally, Islamically get a separation after pleading her case, please, he's beating me, can you please make him separate from me? Then what? She's left with a little bit of money, and then now she has to find another man. And if it happened 3 times, then she has to find another man who is willing to have sex with her and then divorce her and hope that he doesn't cling to her, the second man doesn't cling to her, so she can go back to her first abusive husband. You see how the cycle is going? And before we continue, because there's more to it here, but I want to show you a hadith. Where did it go? Yeah, where the Prophet allowed abuse under his own nose. And the reasoning behind it was bizarre. So here's this case. I'm going to try to skim over it, but it'll be in the description as well. So Aisha said that, okay, so there was a woman, Rif'a divorced his wife, a man named Rif'a divorced his wife, and another man married her, Abdurrahman married her. Aisha said that the lady came wearing a green veil and complained to Aisha of her husband and showed her a green spot on her skin caused by beating. And look at the tafsir here. It says, or the, not even the tafsir, the hadith says it was a habit of ladies to support each other. As if it's a bizarre thing that Aisha would stand up for that woman. So when Allah's messenger came, Aisha said, I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women. Look at Aisha expressing here, and listen to women. She's expressing her displeasure with this abusive environment that believing women are suffering more than disbelieving women. They have more rights. So what is Shabir Ally talking about? This whole things were made better for women because of Islam. Look, her skin is greener than her clothes. And what's sad and pathetic is that this is under the book of, in Sahih al-Bukhari, the book of dressing, the chapter of green clothes. And I've seen that the thing to learn here, one of the things to learn from this verse is that women are allowed to wear green. That's how out of touch Islam has always been. The only reason we have a little bit of a lick of sense today in the da'wah people and apologists is because of outside influence. Like starting from the origins, this is what Bukhari really thought to classify as this hadith as. It has to do with wearing green garments. Okay, so she said, when Abdurrahman heard that his wife had gone to the Prophet, he came with his 2 sons from another wife. She said, by Allah, I have done no wrong to him, but he is impotent and is as useless to me as this, showing the fringe of her garment. So he's not good in bed, or doesn't get hard in bed or something. And then Abdurrahman says, she has told a lie and very strong and can satisfy her, but she is disobedient and wants to go back to her previous husband. The messenger said, if that is your intention, then know that it is unlawful for you to remarry your previous husband unless Abdurrahman had sexual intercourse with you. So that's another part of this weird law. She cannot go back to her ex-husband. Her husband can't divorce her unless he had sex with her first. Otherwise, she's still kind of tied to him. So you see how this feeds into itself? Like, if she's being abused, she has to have intercourse with her husband, who she claims cannot have intercourse, so that she can go back to her ex-husband, or so she could leave the marriage. And then the Prophet says he saw 2 boys with Abdurrahman, his kids from another wife, and he asked, are those your sons? And Abdurrahman said, yes. The Prophet said, you claim what you claim, that he is impotent, but these boys resemble him as a crow resembles a crow. Like, these are clearly his boys, so clearly his dick works. So I'm sorry, but I'm trying to break it down and stoop down to the level of this hadith. How does having children at some point in the past, or with another woman, maybe he's attracted to her more, I don't know, how does having children there mean that he pleases his wife, or that he has intercourse with his wife? How is that proof of anything? Muhammad always uses this bizarre logic, and in Islam in general, in the Quran, well, I guess that's an extension of Muhammad. That doesn't follow. That's a non sequitur. The fact that he had sex before, and that doesn't mean that he's good at it. It just means that he was able to ejaculate a couple of times. What? And aside from that, so there's so many problems with this. Muhammad said nothing about the beating, not one word. I thought that if she went to a judge to plead her case, they would separate because the man is abusing her. I thought it was supposed to be, according to verse 434, a man can beat his wife if she's disobedient. Okay, we got that out of the way. But it's not supposed to be a harsh beating. You're not supposed to leave a mark. And that part is not in the verse. But let's just say you're not supposed to leave a mark. Why didn't Muhammad notice the mark that she showed him that was greener than her garment, and make them separate at that point? So many issues, you realize that this is all built on nothing. It's built on lies upon lies upon lies. I keep seeing this recurring comment in my comments sometimes, without lies, Islam dies. And it bothers me to see any spam comment in general, but I also thought, that's a very simplistic way of putting it. But the more I look into this, the more I think, yeah, it's all built on lies. So someone said that the Arabic version is even worse. I want to skim it right now, but I don't want to pause for too long. Where's the part about... This is weird. Okay. So if the Muhammad said, if you hadn't slept with this husband, or if he hasn't done the deed, then you're not allowed to be with the ex-husband. You're not allowed to divorce and go to the ex-husband. Or until your husband tastes your asaliyatak, like your honey, your dessert. Okay, Muhammad. Anyway, this is proof that a judge is not always the case. If Muhammad himself was the judge, watching a man like bruise his wife and he didn't separate them, women have no rights in Islam, almost no rights. Whatever you frame as rights in Islam for women aren't really rights, are they? So let's go back to this. This Tafsir ibn Kathir was interesting because there were pages, maybe like paragraphs, about what this word had meant. The word in the verse, where did it go? This word right here. I can't. Yeah, quru'an. So the word quru', they kept debating, trying to figure out if it means period or cleansed from period, because they're trying to understand what if it means as soon as she gets the blood, like the third blood, or not. And what is the point of this 3 times of bleeding, 3 periods? Well, there's a very simple idea about, well, if she's pregnant, you don't want to mix up whose child is whose and all that. So you should wait till she has her period first to make sure that she's not pregnant with a man's child and then having intercourse with the second man and so on, fine, let's grant them that. It has to do with keeping the lineage clear. But why 3? Like, does Allah not realize that after 1 there's no more child? Or that's what the like if she had a miscarriage, that's 1, maybe make it 2 to be safe. Why 3? So the man can calm down, apparently. But they're arguing for pages about the specifics. And that is also clear that Allah doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, because we don't understand. Even the Arabs at that time don't understand if he meant 3 periods, 3 cleansings from period. And this hadith was in Ibn Kathir's tafsir. I haven't been able to find it just quickly last night, but I found it interesting because Ibn Kathir is a trustworthy scholar. And here's what this hadith says. We were at Umar's place, and Umar ibn Khattab, a woman came and she said, my husband left me for 1 or 2 periods. Then the period came, well, I guess 2 periods. So I prepared water and took off my clothes and closed my door. She was preparing to clean herself. And Umar, and what happened? Yeah. And then the man came in. Yeah, I can't find it here, but he either came in or, yeah, he came in and he wanted to take her back, or he came in and he started having sex with her. And Omar said to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ma tara, what do you think? They're trying to debate, so does this still apply or not? And he said, okay, no, they didn't have sex. He saw her naked. He says, did he see her before she was allowed to pray? So the logic being that she hasn't washed herself yet, so she's still within the 3rd period, so she's not allowed to pray yet. So she's still technically his wife if he wants her back by seeing her naked. So he replied, yeah, she's his woman as long as she's not yet allowed to pray. So think of how creepy this situation is. This woman comes in and she says, according to your cult leader, your God says that after 3 periods, I'm free. And then my husband came in while I was naked washing with the door closed. And he saw me right before I had that chance to wash myself. And now my back belonging to him. And 2 men were like, what do you think, man? And he's like, yeah, she's still his. What the fuck? What? Anyway. And if someone wants to pull the source of this hadith and prove that it's da'if or this and that, then we have to take apart everything that Ibn Kathir says, because he's a trusted scholar. And now we demonstrated that even trusted scholars talk out of their ass, apparently, sometimes, or they say very misogynistic things. And Umar ibn Khattab was an awful, awful person. So I'm surprised how Muslims are proud of him. Anyway, so in the rest of the tafsir, it says, "Istahlaltum furujahunna bi kalimatillah." So you made their furuj, their vaginas, their private parts halal with God's word. And yeah, so the man's right is that the woman doesn't let in the house anyone that they hate or they decide not to let in. And if that happens, beat them a non-excruciating beating, and make sure to feed them and clothe them and stuff. So I looked up into this. According to this fatwa, which I'm going to link, the man has to give permission to anyone to enter the house, including her siblings. So, of course, if you're thinking about it as don't let strange men into the house, fine, it makes sense. But you can't even let in your siblings into the house without your husband's permission. And many argue not even her parents. Some argue, yes, her parents, it's allowed, but they should ask permission out of respect to the husband. And some would say, no, even her parents, she can't do that without her husband's permission. And it doesn't go both ways, just so we're clear. And if she does that, then beat her. Oh God. And it says here, what are her rights? What are the woman's rights? And it says to feed her if you're eating, to cover her if you're covering. So if you have the money to buy clothes, you're buying her clothes. Don't hit the face. And don't humiliate, and don't leave her except in the house. Don't hit the face. Thank you, Islam, for making it clear. Don't leave bruises, but if you leave bruises in front of the Prophet, that's fine. And don't hit the face. And the man was asking, but I like to look pretty for my wife, or beautify myself for my wife, just like she beautifies herself to me. And he's like, yeah, that's cool. Again, there's a mention of the reason why the man has a right over his wife to decide who gets in the house and who doesn't, and why he can beat her over it is because he um, here they're using this so-called right that women have, that he can't touch her money, right? Like she has that right, and then on the other hand, he has the right to beat her if she brings in someone in the house, including her siblings, without his permission. So I don't know how much more proof you need, but I can keep going. So men have a degree of rights over women in the this means, I can't remember what fadila means, but it's a higher degree of creation and position and obedience. They have to be obeyed, and spending, and getting things done, and fadl in this life and the afterlife, and grace in this life and the afterlife. The men have precedent. The men are, yeah, virtue. That's the fadila is virtue. Yeah. The men are just higher in precedent, in virtue and grace in general. That's here, right? Here it is, based on verse 434. Al-Qurtubi says, of course, the اختلف العلماء, they disagreed. The scholars disagreed, of course, about whether it's the period or the after the period is cleansed. And they disagree with something even Aisha said. So the Aisha's opinion is disagreed with. And this is what I found interesting and bizarre. If a woman says that she in 10 days she had 3 periods, then she should not be believed, and that should not be accepted. And then if she had 3 periods within a month or so, it's accepted if the women accept her testimony, or I suppose if they check. It's not clear here, but it's not unlikely that they would have the woman check that she's not lying. And then that's different opinions of men saying this. And then some say you don't believe her unless it's a month and a half, and some say not unless it's 47 days, and some say 60 days. So here men are trying to decide how likely it is that the woman is lying about her period so that she can get out of the marriage after the divorce is finalized. See how messed up that is? What else? And now they're talking about the word Baal. It's, again, he's raised in position over his wife because of what he owns by her marriage. And it means here God, Rabban, it means Lord. And here it reiterates, according to Tafsir al-Qurtubi, that if a free man divorces his free wife less than thrice, he has the right to take her back, even if she hated it. It's said explicitly, even if she hated it. And it's funny that at the end of everything they say, Allah knows best. Allah Ta'ala A'lem. Allah knows best what the hell he meant by all of this. And this is also interesting and twisted. If a man kisses or sleeps with his ex-wife within, the 3 periods, 2 periods, it is counted as a return to the marriage. Unless he intended it without return, then it is a sin. And the Sunnah says to announce the marriage first, but it is not mandatory. So you can just start kissing and hugging your wife and doing stuff, and that means that you're taking her back. If you looked or touched her with lust, or looked at her vagina with lust, or her private parts, it is a return to the marriage. And they disagree on whether he has to announce it first or not. You see, I don't know what to say. And this one right here, the word ahaq means a comparison, means that more rights. So you're comparing 2 people's rights, meaning his right to take her back takes precedent over her right to herself. That's what it says. حقها بنفسها. That's what Tafsir Qurtubi says. These are not just like some fringe scholars here and there. These are the major classical interpretations, the major interpretations in general. If you want to come up with other interpretations, I don't know what you could use aside from the primary sources. And here the man has a degree higher with his brain or mind, an ability to spend, and the diya, and inheritance and jihad. So the man's diya, if a man is killed, the compensation for his life is higher than the woman. So obviously he's a higher in status, higher in value. So it's everything that I've been saying. And let's see. He has the right to deny her acting a certain way without his permission. She cannot fast without his permission or do hajj without him. Her husband's rights over her take precedent over her rights over him, citing the Hasan or Da'if hadith about prostrating to men. So this hadith, I don't know if I want to go over it, but basically the Prophet says, if I were to command women to, or people to prostrate to anyone but Allah, it will be women to their husbands. But it's a Hasan or Da'if hadith, so make of that what you will. However, he doesn't mention that it's Hasan or Da'if hadith, he's just using it in Tafsir al-Qurtubi. Now, what is next? We're almost done here. قال الموردي, it could be that these rights could be يحتمل, they're not even sure, about the rights in nikah, in marriage and intercourse. He has the right to annul the contract without her. He has the right to divorce her at any time. She has to obey him to bed. She has to. And he doesn't have to obey her. So no, her orgasm is not guaranteed, like they say. And citing hadith about the angels and cursing. I'm sure you've come across this before. This hadith, there's so many versions of it, or so many narrations of it, saying if a man invites his woman to bed and she didn't want to come, so he slept angry at her, the angels curse her till the morning. That is pressure, and I don't know if that can count as consent. Pressure from the divine and his minions. And yeah, Sha'rawi says the woman has Sheikh Sha'rawi. He's a very popular dead Egyptian scholar, and there's a YouTube video that I'm going to link. He's saying how she has no right to say no if the husband wants her back during the 3 months, nor can her guardian say no for her. Her dad, for example, cannot say no for her. And that if the 3 periods pass, then they can renegotiate a marriage if she wants to go back. And that's about it for today. I mean, I don't know what else needs to be said. Shabir Ally, you're a major disappointment to me, because I was hoping that you would bring a fresh new perspective, that you would actually say anything except in the last minute of each video, say we need some change or things have to be viewed differently, but simultaneously say we need to apply those classical interpretations, but we need to apply them within the right context today. You haven't even given room for how we're going to change the classical interpretations. You're just saying we have to apply them selectively. And I know that his heart might be in the right place. It really might. But reform is difficult, if not impossible, in Islam. And I just want to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they're not just putting on a nice face for Islam, because so far that seems to be the case. I want people to be better, whether they remain Muslims or not, but I don't want them to just base it on nothing. I don't want them to not have something to point to so that they can change the minds of the so-called bad Muslims. Until that happens, you all share the same label. Unfortunately, you all share the same religion. And yeah, I'm really exhausted and disappointed by this video today. I'm disappointed by the way that he wasn't able to provide anything new. And I think that's enough, Shabir Ally, I suppose, for now. And feel free to recommend somebody else. By the way, I don't like saying this, but please give this video a like or a comment, especially after the live chat is over, because it does help it reach further. And give me suggestions for the next scholar that you would like me to talk about their lecture. There's a lot that I have in mind, but I could always use some suggestions. And if you have any more questions for me that you would like me to discuss in a future video that is relevant on topic, let me know. I am planning a collaboration with Infidel Noodle at some point, hopefully soon, because we have similar topics that we want to talk about, but from different angles, and it's either going to be a live stream or a couple of different videos. So keep an eye out for that. Please make sure that you do something good today. Aside from leaving a comment, do something good for yourself and for somebody else. And as always, think critically and think for yourself. Take care.